to Electric Vehicles Explained from Electricity North West. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Elaine Wilcock, I'm Director at Elevate, and I'm absolutely honoured to be your host today. We do have a lot to get through. Electric vehicles are such a huge issue, going into all kinds of different areas, from individuals looking to purchase an EV, companies looking to swap fleet over, the charging infrastructure. And we know that the best that we try, we are absolutely not going to get all of your questions answered first time. So what we are really going to encourage you to do is to join the conversation throughout the next few hours. Use the hashtag EVExplained on social. Let us know what more you want to cover. You will also notice that next to where you're seeing this live stream, there is a chat box, and it's been great to see people already using that during the countdown. So again, drop your questions in there. What we're then going to do at the end of this event is answer as many as we can, quick fire on stage, but we will pick up those separately and let you know where you can go to get more answers to all of those questions. Our first speaker of the day is Steve Cox, Engineering and Technical Manager at Electricity North West, and he's going to explain a little bit more about why electric vehicles are so important to decarbonising the region and to outset for the day.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming to this event. I'd just like to echo Iona's thanks to all attendees, and it's gratifying to see so much interest in today's event, and it certainly reinforces our determination to run future events. Thank you for your time in attending this morning, but also can I thank the speakers who we've got lined up today. It's a superb range of experts, both from within Electricity North West, within my team, but also from some of our close partners who we're working with on the challenge of decarbonising transport in the North West. I think today's focus, certainly for us as a business, is the North West of England, but we've been joined by people from all over Europe and in fact all over the world, and that's a real reminder that the challenges that we face in the North West of England are shared by all regions in the UK and by all countries in the world. And it's only by cooperating and sharing information and holding events like this where we have a discussion that we can share best practice and actually make progress together. So our role as Electricity North West is to provide the grid power infrastructure in the North West of England, covering Manchester, Lancashire, Cumbria and parts of Cheshire and Derbyshire. So we supply power to something like 10% of the UK. A population of in excess of 6 million people. So it's a huge responsibility as a business to ensure that we are able to allow our customers and our region to decarbonise. As the network operator, we have three roles. The first of all is we are a business within the North West community, and we share the responsibilities of all other businesses to decarbonise our own operations. Whether that's our fleet transport, whether that's the energy for our businesses, our buildings, whether that's the supply chain in which we operate. Secondly, we hold the responsibility to invest in the region to enable people to move from petrol and diesel vehicles onto electric vehicles. We already invest over £1 million every day in the region's power infrastructure, and over the next few years we'll increase our investment further to assist that decarbonisation of both heat and transport. And thirdly, as a major technology company based in the North West, we have a leadership role to help our customers, whether they be business customers or private customers, to take the next step in their own decarbonisation journey. If we look at the challenge faced by the region to decarbonise by 2038, that requires something like 40 businesses a day in the region to go zero carbon every day from today to 2038. An absolutely colossal challenge, and that's on top of the transport challenge. But it can be done, and we see a great range of initiatives being launched, not only in our business, but by other business leaders and by the local authorities in helping people to make that transition. One of the initiatives we've launched this year is to offer all customers requiring an EV charging point at home a free upgrade to their power service. So we'll invest an extra £1 to £2 million every year in providing customers with certainty that if they buy an EV, wherever they are, we will invest in the network so that they can charge it at home and that any upgrade costs are free. Electric vehicles are key to the decarbonisation of transport in the region. There's a lot of debate about hydrogen and what will happen with hydrogen cars or even fuel cell vehicles. All that debate will pan out over the next few years as the technology develops. But within the carbon debate, it's important to note that every tonne of carbon is a prisoner. Every tonne of carbon that we emit today is emitted forever. And it's essential that both businesses and private residents in the UK and across the world act now to stop those carbon emissions. That means that electric vehicles are not only affordable and viable, they also work, and the infrastructure is rapidly appearing across the region to allow people to adopt those vehicles. And we'll hear more from the speakers today about those initiatives. As leaders, though, we need to give people certainty about what they can do and what will work in the entire decarbonisation area, not just on electric vehicles. For example, there are lots of companies who dig holes in the road. So we've adopted electric mini diggers, electric excavators, which are quiet, powerful. They actually cost less on a whole life cost basis than the diesel equivalents, and they're a fantastic example of what businesses can do now to save money but reduce emissions, including noise pollution. But we definitely can't do it alone as a business, and I'm delighted that we sponsor this event today. We want to share our information with you, but we want to hear from you and listen from you via the chat on your views, your opinions and your advice, not only on what we can do more, but what we can all do more as part of the business community and the residential community in the North West. So I hope you enjoyed this morning's conference, and I'll pass over to our first speaker, Keith, who's one of my team.
Do you want to just jump?
Hi there, my name's Keith Evans. I am the DSO Transition and Smart Grid Engineering Manager for Electricity North West. In this session, I'm going to be going through our electric vehicle strategy, which was published earlier this year. Our electric vehicle strategy sets out our plans to lead and support our stakeholders on the journey to decarbonise the region's transportation. Our role is to enable this journey by preparing the electricity network for the rapid uptake of electric vehicles and associated charging infrastructure needed to support this. To meet these rapidly changing needs of our customers, we're developing smarter, more affordable techniques to create a dynamic and interactive electricity network. Our customers and stakeholders have told us that we need to support them by offering a neutral and trusted source of impartial information as they take their first steps on the decarbonisation journey. And our stakeholders have also told us that it's important that we lead by example. We're supporting our colleagues to embrace low-carbon technologies and to help them decarbonise their own individual means of transportation. The strategy sets out our ambitions to facilitate the transition to EVs and make the North West a cleaner, greener place to live and work. So I'll be going through the main highlights of our EV strategy within this session. To give you some background, the UK government has committed to cut carbon emissions to net zero by 2050. And our local, some of our regional governments have actually set even more ambitious targets of down to 2030. Decarbonisation of transport is central to this commitment, and the UK government has already put in place the ban on sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles by 2030. By the end of the decade, we're expecting that 1 million vehicles will be on the North West's roads. And by 2050, we're expecting the demand for electricity to double. In 2019, a third of the UK emissions were linked directly to transportation. And we're already seeing the change happening. In 2020, we saw 18% of all new car sales being electric. In 2022, GMCA are talking about plans to implement a clean air zone. And by 2035, all new cars and vans in the UK will need to be fully emission-free at the tailpipe. By 2050, we're expecting over 3 million electric vehicles connected to our regional network. So, what is an electric vehicle? An electric vehicle is any vehicle that's powered by an electric motor. They come in many different types. These could be cars, vans, trucks, planes, boats, bicycles, motorcycles. And the main points on EVs, there's 4 main types of EVs, but the key 2 classifications are whether they're pure electric or whether they're a hybrid. And a hybrid is a vehicle that has both an electric motor and an alternative fuel source. And then you also have the mix of whether it's a plug-in hybrid or whether it's a self-charging hybrid. So, benefits of electric vehicles. Reduced emissions. EVs do not produce harmful emissions, which is better for the environment and will help the UK reach its net zero targets. Reduced running costs. Currently, charging an EV is currently around 60% cheaper than petrol or diesel, and maintenance costs are currently cheaper. Incentives. The government currently incentivises the uptake of EVs through discounts on purchase prices, grants on the installation of charge points, and preferential tax rates. With air quality, some of our towns and cities have already introduced clean air zones and are looking to impose taxes on vehicles producing emissions. There's also the noise benefits within our towns and cities. Finally, being able to use renewable energy to power our electric vehicles. We can use sources such as wind and solar panel to further help protect our environment. So our role as Electricity North West. We maintain and upgrade the region's electricity network. We plan for the future and support economic development and transition to net zero. We drive down our emissions and help customers to do the same. We support the net zero commitments, help our customers make the switch to electric vehicles, and prepare the network for the connection of charge points. So our electric vehicle strategy is broken down into 5 key principles: making it simple, listening to our customers, working smart, leading by example, and playing our part in the national strategy. We will make it as simple as possible for our customers to connect their EV charge points to our network. Using a simple, seamless connections process will ensure that customers receive the best possible service, and our aim is to get every connection right for customers' first time purchasing or charging an EV. We already offer a self-service tool which allows customers to check their location on our low voltage network, to connect their EV charge points, or to request a supply increase. Currently, this service is aimed mainly at domestic and small commercial customers, but we're looking to expand this in the future. Our Fit and Inform process ensures that the majority of domestic and small commercial EV charge points can be connected to the network without the need for connections applications. We have a wealth of knowledge which we can share with our customers, including our own expertise in installing EV charge points at our own sites, and we have a number of company experts and external contacts which are available to answer questions on almost every subject relating to electric transportation. In most cases, new EV charge points can be installed without the need to reinforce the surrounding network. Occasionally, we may have to carry out additional work to maintain security of supply and quality of supply. For the vast majority of the customers, this work will be carried out free of charge, but there may still be charges for sites requiring significant levels of capacity or for new customers. If we determine that an installation needs to be upgraded, we will look at options to reinforce the local network using flexible solutions where economical and practicable. As with any new technology deployed on the network, it's important that we train our colleagues to deal with this. This is both for our connection staff so that they can advise our customers correctly, but also our operational colleagues so they know how to work safely around electric vehicle charge points. We'll provide detailed EV charging for our connections and operational teams, including safety implications associated with providing connections to EV charging infrastructure. We will support and engage our customers and the wider stakeholders to help them decarbonise their transportation. Engaging with our stakeholders is vital to the way we run our business. It's important that we develop strong relationships with our stakeholders and understand their needs so that we can deliver our ambitious plans for the decarbonisation together. In some cases, the support we provide is simple. It's ensuring that we maintain a secure and stable electricity network to charge our customers' EVs. We also offer one-to-one support to our customers through different steps needed to choose and connect the right low-carbon technology for their needs. We've set out our support the way we think that it's needed, but we're keen to get stakeholder feedback on how we can engage with them. Local authorities often hold the responsibility for defining local planning policies, determining the location of on-street charging infrastructure, defining local building standards, and providing public infrastructure on-street and in council-owned car parks. They're also looking to decarbonise their own fleet operations. We work closely with all of our local authorities in the region to ensure that energy infrastructure is systematically incorporated into their planning considerations, and that we also support their specific decarbonisation ambitions. Our close relationships help us to understand the requirements and what support they want from us. For community energy groups, we have a dedicated team to support community energy groups meet their ambitions. Community energy groups are really important because they get right into the heart of the community, and it's really important that we work with them right from the beginning of their projects so that they can deliver the schemes that are most essential to their local communities. Fleet operators and businesses currently account for over half of new vehicle sales within the UK, so this is a really key market for us to support. We work closely with businesses to help them decarbonise their own fleets and provide EV services. There are a number of actions that businesses can take, ranging from individual small-scale changes to major national infrastructure projects designed to decarbonise transportation. We offer advice and support. Our website offers a good source of up-to-date information on buying EVs, as well as installing charge points, grants, tax benefits, and guidance on connecting charge points to the electricity network. Our colleagues regularly attend key conferences where we share our in-depth knowledge and expertise. We offer a range of flexible face-to-face support sessions to our customers to discuss their individual project needs and receive updates on our policies. And we also publish annual insights through our annual Distribution Future Electricity Scenarios document, which sets out our understanding of the way we think the use of electricity network will change in our region. This includes a range of possible scenarios for the expected uptake of EVs in the Northwest. And our DFES report incorporates information gathered from local stakeholders, such as development plans from local authorities, and is accompanied by detailed data workbooks, which allow stakeholders to obtain local electricity forecasts for their specific area of interest. We will use our innovation and investment to prepare the network for the rapid uptakes of electric vehicles. Our innovation strategy is focused on delivering projects which support decarbonisation of the entire network, and we will continue to roll out the benefits of previous projects and look for future projects to support our decarbonisation agenda and benefit all of our customers. A good example of this is our Smart Street project, which delivers real savings through the reduction of energy and helps customers to decarbonise without the need for their own input necessarily. Vehicle-to-grid technology allows customers to charge their batteries up using renewable energy and then discharge it when they need that energy. So this could be as simple as if you've got solar panels on your house, charging them up during the day when you're not home and you're not using the energy, and then discharging them at night, which helps to support the local electricity network and also helps keep costs down. This can also be used as a way to actually help customers get more money out of their EVs by charging when electricity prices are low, and then discharging when energy prices are higher to make some money off that. Flexible services EVs could potentially be used as a power resource to contribute to balancing the future power system. The increasing electricity demand and our ambition to use more renewable energy will lead to challenges in securing capacity and balancing the electricity grid. Individual small charging units will have limited impact alone. However, when aggregated, these could provide a good source of commercially viable balancing for the network. So we're really keen to talk to aggregators of electric vehicles charge points about this. We're installing network automation, which will help operate the network more efficiently. Tools such as our active network management system allow us to use spare capacity within the network and create additional capacity via flexible services and flexible connections. In future, we will be able to match demand created by electric vehicle charging with generation and demand response services. This network automation can also be used to interface with aggregators of smart charging devices, allowing them to modify their charging behaviours and avoid network constraints and provide incentivised benefits to their customers. Smart charging is a method of intelligently managing EV charging so it doesn't overload the electricity network. Smart charging during off-peak periods when electricity demand is low means customers can benefit from cheaper electricity and unnecessary network reinforcement can be avoided. Charging can also be shifted to periods when there is plenty of clean renewable energy available. Trials have demonstrated the benefits of preferential charging costs for customers and reduced strain on the distribution network. In 2019, the UK government launched a consultation process on the proposals to mandate smart charging capabilities for all new EV charging points. Under the current recommendations, EV owners would be able to opt out of smart charging if they want to. We will lead the transition to EVs in our region by identifying opportunities to decarbonise transportation within our own business. We're committed to promote the uptake of low-emission vehicles and reducing overall impact on climate change. All of our sites, EVs and electrical equipment are already powered by 100% renewable electricity. We've adapted our low-carbon technology policy to encourage our colleagues to utilise active transportation methods such as walking and cycling, to take public transportation, and to adopt EVs into their own personal lives. We provide on-site charging at our depots, and we're electrifying our fleet. My colleague Lynn will be talking about this later, so I won't go too far into detail on that one. We're working with the rest of the electricity industry and transportation industries to inform national policy. We recognise that we have a key role to play in supporting the uptake of EVs, both locally and nationally. It's essential that the transition is carried out in a safe manner, particularly in relation to the reliability of EV charging. We are part of the national and international working groups which look at developing safe working practices, codes of practice and guidelines. We provide a voice for our customers at the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders EV Working Group, which is made up of key organisations who influence the UK's transition to electric transportation. We are also an active member in the Electricity Networks Association Low Carbon Technologies Working Group. The primary focus of this group is to look at the new technologies such as EV and develop national policies and procedures and guidance and working practices. This ensures a consistent approach to the connection of EVs across the UK. An electric vehicle task force has been formed at the request of the UK government to make suggestions to the government on industry to ensure the energy system is ready for the uptake of EVs. We work with the Energy Task Force to apply their recommendations and support future work. We regularly interface with national government agencies and policymakers to make sure that the guidance on focus of decarbonisation of transport. These include the Department for Business of Energy and Industrial Strategy, the Office for Zero Emissions Vehicles, Ofgem, and the Committee on Climate Change. It is with the support of the electricity industry that the government has been able to bring forward the target date for banning the sale of the sale of new petrol and diesel cars from 2040 to 2030. I'll be back later to answer some questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks ever so much, Keith. Now, if you could just stay with me 1 second, I'm going to pop a couple of questions to you first, Keith. He's so keen to get off. He had such a tough job to do there. When I said we were going to try and do a quick run through of the EV strategy, I think you can all agree that is a tough ask to do in such a short space of time. For those of you like me, the first time I saw this, that were busy scribbling away all of that information, delighted to let you know that you can access that strategy directly through this microsite. So if you just scroll down to underneath where you see this playing on screen, you can download that full strategy. Now, we are, as I say, going to bring Keith back later on to answer a few of your questions. So do keep popping those in the chat box or share with us on social using the hashtag EVExplained. But just before we do this, I just think it might be worth breaking down some of those key stakeholders, because when it comes right down to it, we can't have electric vehicles without electricity. Like, that is how key the role that Electricity North West have to play. So who are the different groups that might need to be thinking about working with Electricity North West?
So these can be local governments, looking at their regional policies, procedures, and how they're decarbonising their own fleets. We have our community energy groups who are looking at how they can provide local charging for their own communities. We've got the businesses and fleet owners who are interested in decarbonising their own fleet operations, and also how they can offer services to others. So leasing companies, for example, are starting to look at electric vehicles going forwards. Domestic customers. I mean, we all travel. And as I say, electric transport isn't just limited to vehicles on the road. It can be electric trains. It could be electric planes in the future. They're looking at electric boats and ferries. So everyone, I think, is starting to get interested in this topic, and we have a range of support mechanisms for all customer types, irrespective of their needs. And these could be one-to-one sessions, or these could just be looking at our website and getting information off our website.
Wonderful, that's great. And I think that bit that you have such an incredible role to play of everything from the individual person looking to buy an electric vehicle. And I'm sure I'm not alone that when you say electric vehicle, I think Tesla and then readdress my budget and go down through the list of cars. But it is literally every mode of transport that we might see electrified in the future. So anyone who is watching, whether you're looking at it as an individual, whether you're looking at companies who might want to innovate in that space, do go to that Zero Carbon Hub. Again, the link to that is on the microsite. Fire through your questions and we will be bringing Keith back at the end to answer those. I'm delighted next to welcome to stage Megan Black from Transport for Greater Manchester. The work that they do here regionally ties beautifully in with that electric vehicle strategy that we've heard. Greater Manchester has set a very ambitious target of decarbonising, will go net zero by 2038, 12 years ahead of the rest of the UK. But there is a much more immediate problem to solve, which is the air quality of the region. And I'm delighted that Megan's going to join us today and talk about both the electric vehicle strategy and the Clean Air Plan.
Thank you very much for inviting me today to talk about the Clean Air Plan that Greater Manchester is currently developing. I'm going to give you a brief run through of where that's up to and then talk a little bit about electric vehicles and Greater Manchester. So if I can start off with just a quick explanation as to air quality and health. So air pollution can be split into two categories. We've got oxide of nitrogen and particulate matter. And road transport is responsible for 80% of nitrogen dioxide concentrations at the roadside, of which diesel vehicles are the largest source. So poor air quality is the largest environmental risk to public health in the UK, and it's estimated that air pollution contributes to the early death of around 1,200 people in Greater Manchester each year. So government statistics also suggest that poor air quality in the UK can reduce life expectancy on average by about 6 months. So there's a high risk for vulnerable residents who spend time in areas or environments with high concentrations of air pollution. And the slide I've put up there is taken from colleagues from Public Health England that just show that air quality can affect people throughout the different stages of their lives. So if I just move on to explain the background to the Clean Air Plan, the legal responsibility to act to reduce nitrogen dioxide concentrations has been legally delegated to local authorities, and that's a result of legal action. The UK government decided that it's the local authorities that must address roadside nitrogen dioxide compliance in their areas. So the 10 Greater Manchester authorities are working together to develop a Clean Air Plan, and that plan is being coordinated by Transport for Greater Manchester. And the aim of that plan is to reduce nitrogen dioxide concentrations to within legal limits in the shortest possible time. So the government have set out the process, and they've also set out the timescales. And as part of that plan, when the local authorities were considering the different options, they must always consider implementing a clean air zone unless they can identify alternative measures that are just effective as reducing nitrogen dioxide in that shortest possible time. So we started out on this journey a number of years ago. I think it was back in sort of 2018. And at that time, we did a lot of modelling to show where the nitrogen dioxide was in the Greater Manchester area. And it showed that if no action was taken, there would be 150 stretches of road that would be in breach of harmful concentrations of nitrogen dioxide. So that was a really useful piece of work to do to benchmark the position that we're in, because when we compared that to the government's model, they just identified 11 locations. So the map that's there shows you the sections of red, sections that are red that are over the legal limit, and the orange section shows those areas that were at risk of breaching the legal limit. So there's an awful lot of work that went into looking at the different options, and as I said before, we had to examine whether a clean air zone was what was needed for Greater Manchester. So in terms of a clean air zone, the government framework set the different categories and compliance levels for travelling in that zone. So there are 4 different types. There's a Class A, which includes buses, taxis and private hire vehicles and coaches. You've got a category or Class B that introduces heavy goods vehicles into that into the zone. You've then got a Class C, which introduces light goods vehicles or vans into the zone. And a Category D introduces cars and motorcycles. So in terms of compliance, it's all driven by the Euro rating of a vehicle, and as it's just set out there, you can see as a sort of a glance whether a vehicle would be compliant or not with the zone the zone framework. There are more vehicle checkers that are online and will make sure that the site has those, but also Greater Manchester has a dedicated website for clean air, which is cleanairgm.com, which you can go on and find lots more information about the clean air plan, but also the links to our vehicle checkers as well. Clearly, ultra-low emission vehicles that have got a significant zero emission range are exempt because they are by nature compliant with what we are trying to achieve, which is the reduction of nitrogen dioxide concentrations on our local roads. So in terms of the key elements of the clean air zone, so this is the position that was set out at consultation. So that consultation took place between October and December of last year. So Greater Manchester set out that it needed to introduce a zone that was across the region, and that would be, the boundary of that would be coincidental with the administrative boundary of the authorities. I think the important thing to note is that the strategic road network or the motorway network is excluded from the Greater Manchester clean air zone, that the zone would operate for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and would be introduced in the spring of 2022. So in terms of how long we anticipate it running for, what Greater Manchester authorities have to do is they have to prove compliance. So that's not only that they've met the limits with regard to the concentrations of nitrogen dioxide, but they will maintain compliance over a period of time. So we expect that it would need to be in full operation until at least the second half of 2026. So in terms of the vehicles that would be impacted, it's about compliance. So those non-compliant vehicles that were Hackney carriages, private hire vehicles, buses, coaches, minibuses, LGVs or vans and HGVs would be included because Greater Manchester is putting forward a Category C clean air zone. So as you can see there on the slides, I have actually got the link to the vehicle checker so you can see whether your vehicle is compliant or not. So in terms of the proposed charges for the clean air zone, again, this is a position that was at consultation. The daily charge would apply for each day a non-compliant vehicle was used within the Greater Manchester Clean Air Zone, with one charge imposed per charging day, which we set out would be midnight to midnight. So however much a vehicle drove within that zone over a 24-hour period. And it would be the owner or registered keeper of a non-compliant vehicle that would be required to pay the relevant charge. And that will be done via a central government payment portal. And we can see from the work that's gone on in Bath recently, they've launched a clean air zone, that portal is now up and running. So in terms of the charges, they're set out for licensed Hackney carriages and private hire vehicles of £7.50 a day at consultation, and for minibuses and vans we set out £10, and then for buses, coaches and HGVs we set out £60. You'll just see on there that there is a note that talks about how that charge has changed, because we did actually do a public conversation about the Greater Manchester Clean Air Plan back in 2019, just to better understand what people thought of an initial outline business case. So the charges have been at consultation were based on the fact of we got a lot of information from the conversation, and we had a better understanding of the behavioural response that people would have to those charges, because we need to introduce a charge that is the lowest but most effective charge in the fact that it encourages the right behaviour change of people moving to compliant vehicles. So in terms of the funding that we're looking for, Greater Manchester has requested a funding package from the government totalling more than £150 million, and that is to support the owners or registered vehicle, the registered keepers of non-compliant vehicles with the cost of upgrading to a vehicle that wouldn't incur a charge. So far, £41 million has been confirmed by the government, and further funding awards are anticipated. And the aim of that funding is to mitigate the negative social and economic impacts on businesses and those individuals that would most be affected by the introduction of a clean air zone. And even before COVID-19, Greater Manchester was proposing a hardship fund of at least £10 million to support individuals, companies and organisations who would be particularly vulnerable to the introduction of that daily charge. So in terms of where are we up to, the consultation for the plan ended in December 2020, and we had over 4,700 responses, which was really good. The assessment of those responses is taking place now. We're also looking at the impacts of COVID-19 as well, because clearly between drafting the original set of proposals, COVID-19 came along and we needed to understand that. So as part of the consultation, we also asked those people affected what the impact of COVID-19 has been on them as well, to make sure that when we pull forward a final package of measures, that it takes account of all of that information. So decision makers will consider the final Clean Air Plan as soon as possible, and we are setting out that will be by summer 2021 at the latest. But in terms of COVID-19 and what that means for air quality, I think we're really clear that air quality impacts during the COVID-19 pandemic isn't expected to lead to sufficiently long-term reductions in the amount of pollution such that we wouldn't need to introduce a clean air zone. So we are continuing with the development of our plan with the support of government, who've been very clear that we need to keep moving forward with that. So there is still proprietary work being undertaken for the development of that clean air zone in order to meet the timescales for the achievement of nitrogen dioxide compliance, which is set by the government as we need to achieve that by 2024, because the Greater Manchester authorities are under a direction to act. So just turning to electric vehicles. I think one of the things that's come out through particularly the public conversation that we had in 2019 was the fact that the availability and access to charging infrastructure is recognised as a critical barrier to people adopting electric vehicles, really highlighted as a concern during that conversation. So the requirement for infrastructure is, critical for that reason, but it's even more critical now the government have committed to phasing out the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles by 2030. Our latest demand forecast indicates that we will require significant expansion of the publicly accessible charging network within the next 5 years in order to meet our carbon reduction targets. And we also know that there is a need for substantial public sector intervention to keep that going. I think my slides were written before the mayoral election, and he's been very clear post-election that he wants to see the electric charging network in Greater Manchester expand this year and next year, setting some very clear targets, ambitions for us. So we as Greater Manchester are developing our own EV strategy, and that's in development at the moment, and we're going to set out what Greater Manchester's vision is for the region and a set of strategic principles to guide the future development of the network. In terms of Greater Manchester, at the moment we've got about 364 publicly accessible charging points. TFGM own the public charging assets, and they are part of the BEV network, and at the moment we've got 133 devices, and that slide that I've put up just shows that represents almost a third of Greater Manchester's EV charging infrastructure. So, happy to take any questions.
Wonderful, thanks ever so much, Megan. The clean air is the thing that, I know we've spoken about it previously and had other events before, and I think it's that really direct link between public health and air quality, and if anything, COVID has probably increased our awareness of that. But I am going to start by asking you the question that it probably annoys you, because I'm sure you get it all the time, and I just think it's worth getting out of the way. Is the clean air zone essentially a congestion charge?
No, it's not. So the clean air zone is applicable to those vehicles that aren't compliant with the clean air zone framework in terms of compliance. And over time, the number of vehicles that will be impacted will reduce as the zone does what it needs to do, which is improve the air as people replace their vehicles for cleaner ones, whereas a congestion charge is something that is designed to raise amount of money all the time, and people, regardless of their vehicle type, would have to pay it.
Fantastic. And as I say, I know it's a question that's been floating around for a long time, and it's one that I still hear. So I think it is just worth reiterating, like, the aim of a clean air zone is to make no money. Like, we just want clean air out of it. The clue is in the name there. Now, we are, as you say, going to have this clean air zone coming through over the next couple of years. We've obviously changed our transport quite dramatically up and down as we've come in and out of lockdown. What are some of the key things that individuals and businesses can be doing right now to make a difference to the air quality in the area?
I think everybody needs to think about their behaviour and how they travel. You know, walking and cycling for short journeys rather than getting in their car or vehicle. I think the other thing that people can also be doing is to start looking at their fleets and preparing for a clean air zone and understanding what that means for them and making arrangements. There's a lot of information on our website about the funding that's proposed and the policy that went out at consultation, which clearly we're considering at the moment ahead of the final plan. But yeah, just looking at the way people travel, looking at the way staff travel as well. Every journey can be potentially taken differently and can make a difference in terms of air quality.
Fantastic, and it's such a great starting point to just be like, if I'm going to make that journey, and whether we've wanted to or not, we've all gone through a bit of a reset period. So as we start to get back into those normal journeys, think about, you know, do you need to get into a car to make this journey? You know, a lot of us have taken up more walking and cycling over the last year than we ever have before, and I know there's a huge amount of work going across Transport Greater Manchester to increase that network for active transport alongside the EVs. So the final point that would be great to mention, and it is actually linked to this slide that we still have on behind us, that is a lot of different ways of charging vehicles. People still say it's quite difficult to find the right type of charging where you want it. That presumably is something that is a real live issue for Transport for Greater Manchester when you're increasing those, is to make it accessible to all different types of vehicles. Oh, that's a really good question. So, yeah, different vehicles have different connection types. We need to look at what we're putting in. We also need to make sure that we help explain EVs to people, and the fact that there are apps that you can get. You'd say which car you've got, it will tell you and direct you to which charge you need to go. I know that the government are very keen and have just done some consultation around particularly the price of charging to make that comparable across the marketplace, because people are very used to paying for their fuel in a price per litre, and so they want to make sure that price per kilowatt hour, so people can do it. As an EV owner, I would say that it is something that you do get used to quite quickly, and I think that's part of the thing that we need to do, is just to explain that it is a jump, but it's not too big a jump, and you know, it is possible to do and to transition to an electric vehicle. Wonderful. And over the course of today, we are going to hear from a few more individuals and businesses who have made that jump to EVs and share their journeys. Nice little pun there, towards electrification with us. So thanks ever so much for joining us, Megan. We will direct people to Transport for Greater Manchester website for people who are in the area and want to know more about those plans and what's coming. And next on stage, I'm going to be joined by Lynn Tracy from Electricity North West. over the course of this morning some of those real big picture ideas about the EV strategy and the role that Electricity North West has to play in enabling more of us to take up electric vehicles either individually or within businesses. I don't think it is still anywhere near clear enough just how much work goes on behind the scenes at Electricity North West. And I was absolutely delighted when Lynn was, let's be honest, volunteered into coming on stage to talk about that role, because I see in the work that we do with them just how much is going on behind the scenes. And I think it's really important that we get a sense of not just what Electricity North West is doing publicly facing, but the work that is going on internally. So could we start, Lynn, could you just introduce yourself and a bit of an overview of what your role is?
So I've worked for Electricity North West for the last 14 years. The last 2 of those have been dedicated to working on our Leading the North West to Zero carbon plan. So I work with our senior leadership across the business, making sure that we can deliver on those obligations. A big part of my role is making sure that we communicate our learnings out to other people to help bring people along on this journey with us and to stimulate that change. So a lot of my responsibilities are around making sure that we've got that collateral available for us. And I'm also a carbon literate citizen, delivering carbon literacy training for all of our leadership through Electricity North West to help us reach silver accreditation this year, because we recognise that not only do you need to change technology, but you have to have that behavioural change as well in order to make 2038 and 2050 a success.
Incredible, and such a wide-ranging role that you've got there in terms of, this is what businesses need to know, this is what our employees need to know. Elevate is also a carbon literate organisation, so really great to see that training going out. And it is for people who might not be aware of the carbon literacy training. It's very pledge-based. It's not just sit and listen. It is about that mindset change and taking action. So can you summarise for us kind of why is this issue important to Electricity North West? What is it that you're trying to achieve?
So our overall goal is to be carbon zero by 2038, but as the DNO for the North West, it's also our responsibility, like I said, to bring people on this journey with us. So we need to create that change and make the network available for low carbon technologies to be connected and make it affordable for people to do that. We developed our Leading the North West to Zero carbon plan, and this sets out how we're spending £63.5 million between 2019 and 2023, decarbonising our own operations, and it paves out ways in which we can help customers, colleagues, to do the same. So it's all for us just about bringing people along and stimulating that change and encouraging this to happen, because without our knowledge, probably a lot of people probably wouldn't know where to go.
Absolutely, and I think we see that real appetite for change right across the business community, but it is, even when you just take electric vehicles as a little slice of that decarbonisation, there's still a lot there to think about. Now, people might be watching this and they've heard, Keith talk about electrifying your own vehicles, moving into kind of electric mini diggers and some of the stuff. And they might be thinking, that's great, you're Electricity North West. I'm sure it was really, really easy for you. Like there were no problems, smooth sailing start to finish. What was it actually like?
It was a bit of a learning curve for us. So obviously we recognise that having EV charging points at the workplace is going to be a vital facility for businesses going forward. So we looked at installing our own charge points at all of our depots. So we looked at a different range of chargers available. Because the majority of our staff are based in depots for at least 6 hours a day, we rolled out a slower version of chargers, so 13 amp chargers across the depot with the odd faster chargers that are available. Because if you're in a location for more than 6 hours, installing 13 amp chargers is not only cheap to do, it's easy to do, but it gives you that flexibility then to provide more infrastructure in the future. So that's what we opted to do. There are other faster chargers available, and you'll hear from Paul at Drax later on who can talk to you about that. But I guess for us, one of the biggest learnings was probably getting a contractor on quite early. So get them involved in the design, talk to them about what you want. So are the chargers going to be there for just your staff or for visitors as well? So how long do you envisage people to be charging up for? Are you going to have them as free vend, or are you going to charge for them? And also, is your site closed? Because then you can look at different other technologies available. But one of the things that you definitely must consider is what your agreed supply capacity is, because this could be quite expensive for you to upgrade if you wanted to. So having that in mind at the very beginning is vital.
Brilliant. And I think it's some real basics there of project management. And when you say it, it sounds quite simple. It's, you know, it involves somebody early. But the speed that this area is changing, for anyone who's an expert in that area, there must still be an element of guesswork as how many of our staff are actually going to use this? How long is it going to work? Have you seen a real uptake in the use of those charging points? I appreciate your offices have not been open as much as they might have been over the last year or so.
So since we launched our new low carbon transport policy, in the last 6 months we've seen an order uptake of 30 electric vehicles. We've had some orders for plug-in vehicles as well, but we've got 30 electric vehicles within our colleagues. So the uptake that we've seen has been brilliant in the last 6 months, and what we've done is, because of this uptake, we've recognised that we need to further support our colleagues. So we're also looking to install chargers in some of our substations. And we'll probably need to review the chargers that we have in site to increase demand, to increase the numbers available, and also the type of chargers available for staff, because especially for our operational colleagues who are possibly not in the office that often, they need to come in, get the quick charge and then get out on site again, because their job is to make sure that people are back on supply if they are unfortunate enough to have a power cut. So it's monitoring that, but the uptake has been huge, and it's been it's been a brilliant success actually. And a lot of our colleagues are asking us, what's next, what's more, what's happening next, what can we do more? So it's been brilliant.
That's wonderful to hear, and I'm sure that the businesses that are watching this today and are thinking about starting through there, I think what you've touched on there is that constant review as your needs change, as use changes, as patterns start to develop, to be able to keep that on review. Now, next, I just want to ask you about these electric mini diggers, because I hear good things about them. So can you tell us a bit about how that came about and what the response is to the people that are using those?
I can't remember how it came about, unfortunately. But since I've been involved in the carbon plan, we have purchased 4. So originally our plan was to purchase 2, but the trial of those 2 electric mini diggers was brilliant. So not only did our staff find them much safer to use because the engines are quieter, so it makes the jointing area a lot safer, but also it impacts on our customers as well. So because of the noise reduction, we found that we can work much later in the night, so we're not disrupting people with the noisy diesel type generator electric mini diggers that are available. So we went to purchase another 2. So we have 2 in the north and 2 in the south, and the lads love them. They're brilliant. And obviously they're charged by our 100% renewable energy tariff that we have fulfilling our buildings and depots.
That's brilliant. And I think sometimes when we think about making that move, it's almost like we're kind of forcing people over. So it's great to see that, we love using them, and actually those unexpected benefits that, they're safer, they're quieter, we can work at different times is wonderful. What other benefits have you seen as Electricity North West as you've started to go down this route of helping people onto electric vehicles?
I think one of the things that we commissioned some research with the Tyndall Centre and Impact Research over the last couple of years, and all of that is available on our website, and it's kind of helped to produce the content that is on there. But one of the things that has come clear from all of the research is that people do want to change to an electric vehicle or another form of low carbon technology, but they just don't know how to do that. There's so many. If you was to go into Google today and put in how to install an electric vehicle charge point or similar, you'd be inundated with the results. So for us, a massive part of our journey is to help educate customers, to tell them that you don't need to have a 25 grand charger installed at your office or home. There are other things that you can do. So all of the research, as I say, has formed the content on the website, and all of that helps our customers because they have told us that they see Electricity North West as an independent trusted advisor. So they're looking to us for that information, for us to provide that information on what's available, how much it's going to cost, what that return on investment is, and also the carbon savings associated with some of these things that we're kind of pushing forward. So it's been great, and that's where we see our role as bringing people along to help stimulate that change and for everyone to reach 2038 and 2050.
Wonderful, and just as a reminder for people watching, the website, that Net Zero Hub, is available directly through this microsite. So if people are watching and thinking, this is actually what I need, I've been Googling for a long time, that's where you need to be going.
Yes.
In terms of that support and engagement with businesses, the world is now starting to open up a little bit. How are you intending to support businesses in particular, but also individuals? You know, what role can Electricity North West play there?
So we have an open door policy. Our energy solutions team can help you understand what your agreed supply capacity is. They can help you on with that journey. You can contact any of us and we will all be available to help you through a process of either having a connection or getting that additional supply, or just inquiring about what is available. And the website is a huge portal for that information, but we are hoping to host more events like this to help getting out there and engage with people. And as we follow our own journey to decarbonisation, and the more activities that we do with that, I'm hoping to turn those into more business cases for customers, so that they can just go on our website in 3 clicks and get the information that they need to help them with their journey. So as I say, it will include things like investment, return on investment, what the carbon savings are, because it's not just about installing it, it's everyone's got an obligation to reduce emissions, and having that information within that will hopefully help people decide, no, this is actually what I should be doing.
Wonderful. So you've taken on the incredibly ambitious task there, been a bit of a one-stop shop, that this is where you can come to and we can start to answer all of those questions. That's fantastic. And for people watching, we have got opportunity later on today to answer some of your questions, so do keep sending those through. I'm not going to put Lynn on the spot later, but her colleagues Mike and Keith will be answering some of those questions later on today. As Lynn says, it's an open door. It's, you know, of all the organisations we've worked with, there are a few that are more open to having those conversations, and a real generosity in terms of sharing out all of that information, and delighted that you're running events like these to start to answer those questions. We know that there's so much information out there that distilling it can be the hardest job. So thanks ever so much for joining us, Lynn. Next up, we have Stuart McBain, and we've spoken for some time today about electric vehicles without really chatting to anyone about driving an electric vehicle and what that experience is like. I'm not going to steal Stuart's thunder, but fair to say he has a real unique insight into what driving EVs around the UK and around the world is like.
My name is Stuart McBain and I'm an accountant from Liverpool. In March 2017, I became the first person to drive around the entire coast of Britain in an electric car. You'd say to yourself, why did I do that? Well, apart from being a great adventure, there was an idea at the time in the media that if you owned an electric car, you'd suffer from range anxiety, which is the irrational fear of not being able to get to your destination without running out of energy. And I decided that the longest journey that you could do in the UK would be the entire coast, and so that's what I set out to do. So where did this all come about? I was born in 1964, and by 1973, I was 9 years of age. I told you I was an accountant. So why is that relevant? Well, 1973 was the year of the OPEC oil embargo, where the predominantly Arabic countries held the world to ransom in terms of the price of oil, and the Western countries held out as long as they could. This resulted in a shortage of fuel, and the government at the time was forced to turn off the electricity at 6 o'clock every evening. Now, as a 9-year-old boy, that was quite exciting to switch the switch and nothing would happen, and look at the TV and nothing would happen. And that's when I first became aware of what energy, or specifically electricity, was all about. Fast forward another 3 years, and I'm now 12 years of age, and I'm in school, and we're taken down to the assembly hall and shown a promotional video, possibly by BP or Esso or one of the other large oil companies, with the reassuring tones of a speaker like Bob Holness saying, "Listen lads, don't worry, there's at least 60 years worth of oil left." And this here is a picture of that very film, showing the supertanker going across left to right across the screen with all that 60 years worth of oil attached to it. And I thought, this is a horror film. 60 years is in my lifetime. What are we going to do about this? I need to do something about this. Electric vehicles, they've been around for an awful long time. In fact, when the first internal combustion engine was being devised by Rudolf Diesel, electric cars were around then. The Rudolf Diesel was originally designed to run on peanut oil and not mineral oil. Whenever people start talking about electric cars, invariably the word sustainability comes along. I think we've got to be very, very, very careful with this word. Excuse me. To sustain just means to continue and maintain, and doesn't actually imply any kind of length of time. At the moment, we have a situation where all the energy comes from a non-renewable fossil source, which will eventually run out. Coal, gas and oil is measured in years, tens of years, or at best, hundreds of years. Now, on the other hand, the sun is going to be shining for millions, if not billions of years. And here's a bit of an irony, is that where did this fossil fuel come from? Well, initially, sunlight shone on the planet, and plants captured that energy and then eventually died. And then over millions of years, they were compressed with great heat and power, and then they were turned into the fossil fuels. So the irony is when you go along to the garage and fill up your car with petrol or diesel, you're actually using solar power. So this idea of sustainability, what we actually really mean is something that lasts an awful long time. So if we move our energy alliance towards solar energy itself directly in the form of wind or solar, well then therefore we've got a chance of lasting as long as the sun will, which is millions or billions of years. So this picture here is showing wind being converted directly into solar energy. This picture here is the iconic waterfront in Liverpool, showing the Port of Liverpool, Cunard and Liver buildings. And for me, they represent the institutions which are business, religion and government. But it's not that I'm really interested in. It's what's in front. It's the people. It's the people who will encourage and make happen this energy transition from a unsustainable to a sustainable one. So charge around Australia. After driving around the coast of Britain, and then the next year driving around the coast of Iceland, my next challenge was to drive around the island of Australia. Part of the problem with that is there isn't energy infrastructure all the way around, and so therefore at some stage you're going to have to charge off grid. Now a friend of mine knew that I was going to undertake this drive, and he'd had a development in the print technology world and was trying to contact a professor based in Newcastle because his print technology would improve this person's technology, which was all about printed solar panels. So I said to my mate Mark, let's go and see this professor in Newcastle. He said, it's in Australia, Newcastle University, Australia. So off I trotted to see Paul and said to him, I want to drive around the coast of Australia and I need to charge the car off grid, but I can't use a traditional panel because they're too big and too heavy. And he said, well, we're developing a printed solar panel which is lightweight. So this September, I was going to undertake the journey, but unfortunately because of COVID, it's been postponed till next September. So I've made a little video that will outline and demonstrate what this is all about, and I hope that you enjoy it.
If we think about what printed solar panels offer us, what potential they have, then we need to think about the sorts of things that we can do with them that we can't do with conventional solar panels. In particular, these printed solar panels are ultra flexible, ultra thin, and ultra lightweight. That means that we can look at applications where we can cover them across vast areas, and because they're printed, at really low cost. So imagine a world where every building, every structure has a coating on it that generates power. That's the potential of this technology.
Well, I don't know about anyone else, but that has definitely given me itchy feet in wanting to get out and about and travelling again. I'm delighted that we have a chance now to find out a little bit more around those journeys and what it was actually like. I think we found out what you were like as a person the time that we realised you were from the Northwest and had confidence in the sun shining. That is clearly an optimistic outlook on life. So how much planning went into that first drive around Britain? Was it, you know, jump in the car and hope for the best, or how did you go about that?
No, certainly not. Is that it was dictated to is where the charging points were. So that in England and Wales, the car, I was using my own car at the time, there's an infrastructure that was already existing. But in Scotland, there was no infrastructure whatsoever. So you'd have to charge using the portable charger that comes with the car, which charges at a speed of 7 miles an hour. So that we had to book all the hotel accommodation, because I took 23 days to do the entire journey. I had to book all the hotel accommodation in advance and have this sort of odd conversation with them where you'd say, I'm bringing my electric car and I need to plug it in, so can I have a room which is close to where the car's going to be parked? But most people were quite understanding, and it wasn't really an issue. The reason why it took 23 days is because I didn't want to do it as a marathon or sprint or something. I just wanted to enjoy the time. So most days there'd be places that I'd go and visit. So the Centre for Alternative Technology in Wales and the Green Britain Centre in Norwich and Findhorn up in Scotland, for example, so that I'd go and see people and have a chat and explain what I was doing. I even took a little pledge with me where people pledged that they were going to uptake renewable electricity as a way forward.
Fantastic. What a great way to actually get out and about and demonstrate that. So it sounds wonderful. Were there any days when things didn't go according to plan? Was there any kind of close call moments?
There was when we were in Iceland, especially on the east coast, where there was, again, no charging infrastructure. There was one day where the journey meant that we had to stop for a number of hours at lunchtime to recharge the car. And effectively, we'd gone up the hill, which uses quite a lot of energy, sat at the top of the hill. We had 2 different cars during that particular adventure. And we were there 4 or 5 hours charging the cars up. So that because we knew we were going downhill, is that you've got two dials on the car. One is distance to empty, an estimate as to how much battery life is left, and distance to arrival. So when we actually left, is the distance to destination was 20 miles more than the distance that we had left in the battery. So that as you were going down the hill, is the estimated travel distance was increasing, whereas the actual travel distance was getting smaller. And by the time we arrived at our destination, I think had about 5 miles on the clock.
That's plenty.
Plenty, yeah.
Not even close. So we just kind of dropped in then when you were in Iceland. Why was Iceland the next challenge? Is it good for EVs, or did you feel actually this might just be more of a challenge?
I've really been interested in Iceland because from a very early age I've known that they've had virtually all of their electricity generated from renewable sources, which is water, hydro effectively, or hot rocks, the water exchange plants that they've got. And there's an energy branding conference that I've been going to there since its inception, and I became very good friends with the organiser, and he heard about my drive around the UK, so he said, well, why don't you drive around Iceland ahead of our conference, which I did do. So there was another occasion where we were parked up, is that I left the car door open and there was a goat jumped into the car. Now,
of course there was.
Yeah, of course, but it was quite a rare breed, and it was of interest because when we got back to Reykjavik, we were interviewed, and they were more interested in the goat than they were with my car. I had a document which I was recording.
David Attenborough's got nothing on this.
I had a document in the car where I'd predicted what the mileage was going to be and the actual mileage that we'd achieved and the uses, etc. And it was on the driver's seat. And when the goat jumped in, I thought it was going to eat this piece of paper. So I was quite nervous and worried. They were the only problems, really.
Please tell me we have this clip on film somewhere. We can look at charging around Iceland with goat.
I've got a photograph of the goat for sure, yeah. And
wonderful. We will find that. For those of you who watched the video earlier, that video is also available through the microsite if you want to watch that again. Unfortunately, no rogue goats on that video, but nonetheless, very interesting. So I know that you had this planned and then COVID kind of took over and that's been delayed. How long is this going to take? Obviously, the coast of Australia is a very different proposition to the coast of the UK.
Well, again, it's determined by how much you can charge. And so that when planning the panel sizes, is that one of the stipulations is that I wanted to charge at 10 mile an hour, which is obviously faster than the portable charger. So working on 10 hours a day, you're going to get 100 miles of battery charge, and so therefore the majority of the trip is determined by that 100 miles. The car may have 350-mile range, but once you've got no miles in it, you can only put 100 miles in and therefore drive 100 miles. So with this particular trip is that the Australian partners applied for and got a government grant to take STEM subjects to remote and difficult to reach communities, which means schools, which is absolutely fine because I want to pitch up at a school, roll out my panel, sit there for 10 hours charging the car and then drive off. So that in answer to the question, that the project's going to take about 3 months altogether.
Fantastic. And again, such a great opportunity there, not just for you to go on this amazing adventure and drive around, but to actually inspire the next generation to get more involved. And go into some of those kind of, harder to reach communities within Australia. How important are things like renewables and EVs to kind of the Australian economy and the upskilling? It's something that we obviously talk about a lot here. Are they seeing the same over there?
Well, interestingly, on the news this morning, they were saying that there was a 25% increase on solar panels in Australia, whereas I'm led to believe that the government is not pursuing the same sort of route. So there is definitely a push and pull going on within that country. But really, it's such a place with such a high level of quality sunlight and so much open space that this technology absolutely lends itself to it.
Fantastic. And we're going to get the piece de resistance out now. When we talk about these solar panels, shall we stand up? And you can actually now see this is what the solar panel actually looks like. Now, I don't know about you, but when you say solar panel to me, I do not imagine something that I can literally roll up, that it's light, it's easy, it's flexible. What are the potential uses for solar panels like that we might not have been able to do before?
Well, essentially, this is a printed product rather than a manufactured one. So that I'm sure that in years to come is that you'll be able to coat surfaces rather than this is printed on a PET substrate. Is you could effectively just print on any surface, a roof or a wall, and connect that up and harvest the electricity that way around. So that the uses are endless. The answer is wherever there is a need for energy, electricity, this could satisfy it.
Incredible. And Australia clearly leading the way on some of this stuff, and they get a lot of sunshine. Is this something that we are now going to start to see more of in the northwest of England, that actually we can start to really generate solar panels even on days like today in beautiful Manchester where the sun is not quite guaranteed?
Well, the professor himself is actually from a place called England. He just emigrated over there some 20 years ago. And that recent conversation with him last week is that we were talking about a joint venture with my friend who I mentioned in the presentation before, Mark, who has a development in the printing world. This is all about organic electronics. That's Paul's area. He's the professor. That's his area of expertise. Printing is not his thing. So that bringing the two people together, as I said, last week, is we've agreed that we're going to apply for some funding to develop the next stage. This product at the moment, it has what's called a very low harvesting rate. That's the amount of energy that you collect that falls per square meter. Once you can increase the harvesting rates, this then becomes a very, very cheap, if not the cheapest form of energy on the planet.
Amazing. And what a wonderful point to finish on there. That it's great talking about electric vehicles, but we need to think about where that electricity comes from. So having those really easy to use renewables has got to be top of the agenda, and also shows real scope for innovation and commercial applications in that space. Now, those of you who are based within Greater Manchester in the North West might be aware that any conversation that you have around electricity and renewables, you know at some point Emma's going to pop up and say, what about hydrogen? So, of course, we decided we would get him on stage again today to talk about the role that hydrogen plays, because whilst electric vehicles are incredibly important, they are not the only alternative, and we're not in a position where we can choose one or the other. We need all of the solutions at scale as quickly as possible. So I'm delighted to welcome Emma Ghaffar to the stage to talk about the role of hydrogen in transport.
Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for inviting me here again today. I'm here today to talk to you about the role of hydrogen in transportation specifically. Now, I'm not against electric vehicles. I think they're fantastic. I think what we hope to recognise after today's presentation is that a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle is still an electric vehicle. Okay. So, to give you some context of who we are, so I'm the director of this new £4.1 million facility at Manchester Metropolitan University. So what we are is we're a state-of-the-art facility where we generate hydrogen on the 5th floor of a tower block in the centre of Manchester through electrolysis. We store that on the roof and we use that for various experiments. We support over 80 SMEs currently and on various pieces of research. So you can see we'd look at nanomaterials for fuel cells. The main cost of a fuel cell is the fact that it's got a lot of platinum in it. So we try and eradicate the use of platinum or reduce that platinum content with other materials. Graphene being a prime example. There's other projects that we're involved in, and we're involved with a number of collaborators, both with businesses, in terms of policymakers. We're writing a hydrogen and fuel cell strategy for Greater Manchester. We're supporting the ambition of Greater Manchester's 2038 target by many different mechanisms, the Energy Innovation Agency being one of them. We work with schools because I think fundamentally that education piece is critical. So the high schools program is done with, I think, 7 partners across 5 countries, and that is targeting thousands and thousands of students on a weekly basis. We're trying to establish Greater Manchester to be a hydrogen discover, deploy and develop facility. So that's not just about our facility, it's about some projects that I'm going to talk to you about shortly. And there's a collaboration of industrial organisations, many household names that formed UK H2 Mobility that is really looking at how do we deploy hydrogen infrastructure across the UK. So in terms of what is hydrogen and what is a fuel cell, I think this is quite key and quite critical to get across. That's supposed to be a video, but I don't know if it's going to actually work, but we'll see. No, it didn't work, but that's okay. So in terms of what a fuel cell is, it's quite simple because the bit we're really interested in is how it creates electricity. So it's hydrogen in, oxygen out, and you get heat and water. That's really it. There isn't anything that technical. Fuel cells are not new technology. All that displaces the battery is a fuel cell, and as long as that fuel cell has a supply of fuel to it, which is hydrogen, you can see the chemical reaction taking place there, which is really that lovely piece of electricity that is being generated there. So in terms of why fuel cells are attractive for transportation, so I've tried to position this in what we've got now, obviously the role of EV, and what fuel cells bring to the party. So in terms of fossil fuel, yeah, it's stable and abundant, it's widely available, it's clearly mature, capital costs are low because it's been around for a long time, but obviously there's a problem because that's why we're here today. It emits quite a lot of CO2. In terms of batteries, it might not be the perfect battery picture, but it's emission-free, it's mature technology, and the capital costs are medium. But I think we'll all agree, for those who've had electric cars, and I have had 2, the charging time is slow and the capacity is limited. And when you've got your family in the car and you're 12 miles away from home and you've got 5 miles left on your range, it's quite worrying. But what fuel cells bring to the party is it is, again, emission-free, it refuels in minutes. There is a larger capacity, but the refueling infrastructure isn't in place, and it's expensive technology. But that will be reduced with economies of scale and some of the research that we're doing. In terms of fuel cells in the transportation sector today, so you can see the transportation sector highlighted within that graph within the middle, but there's a misconception that some of these vehicles don't exist. Passenger vehicles exist. Toyota, Honda, Hyundai have all developed fuel cell vehicles that are commercially available today. You probably wouldn't buy one in the centre of Manchester because you wouldn't be able to refuel it. So you'd have an expensive paperweight. In terms of the trucking sector, that's probably the sector that heavy goods vehicles are probably more suited to hydrogen, and the fact that you can refuel them in minutes and you can get extended range. When you look at a fuel cell, if you size that fuel cell accordingly, you just have to increase the size of the tank, which are carbon fibre enforced, to get your range. So you will probably get, in the vehicle term, around 300 to 400 miles with a 3-minute refuel. And that's the critical point. So it lends itself from the passenger vehicle market to certain sectors. So the police, for example, the Met Police are utilising fuel cell vehicles in London. There's an ambition for Greater Manchester Police to do the same. Forklift trucks is probably the best example that is cited globally because there's quite a lot of them. I mean, that figure's probably increased. This is a really good example in the sense of the world's first hydrogen train, because we're never going to electrify another rail network in the UK. I don't believe. If we do, I'm wrong. But there's a need to electrify the rail network because we can't keep using diesel railways. So hydrogen fuel cells trains have been developed both in Germany, they've also been developed in the UK, and they're being trialled on various different networks at the moment, and they're working very, very well. So in terms of describing what a fuel cell is, I said at the start I wasn't against electric vehicles. For my mind, it's an exactly the same concept. There's an electric motor, there's a battery involved within it. You can see the fuel cell stack within the middle, which is where your battery would go, and all that you've got that is different is that fuel tank, which again is providing you that range and that instant refuel. But it's all down to, this doesn't make any kind of sense unless that refueling infrastructure is there. And that's what an upcoming hydrogen strategy that the UK government is going to launch quite soon is going to showcase. Projects like UK H2 Mobility will support it, and it will be city regions that will probably push this more than anyone else. In terms of other alternatives that are available, and this is a collaboration between Ballard and a UK company called Arcola, they've developed a fuel cell refuse collection vehicle, because that, in my mind, if you look at Manchester City Council, for example, they've bought 27 waste disposal trucks. Electric versions of them won't suit the complete drivetrain of everywhere they've got to go. So the next ones that they want to procure, they are reviewing whether a fuel cell vehicle will lend itself to that. But again, it's back down to that infrastructure problem. How do we solve that? In terms of aviation, I'd love to go on that aeroplane, but in terms of aviation, hydrogen is one of the technologies that most of the aviation industry, like Airbus, Boeing, they've all got fuel cell development programs. They see a potential future of aviation with hydrogen. Now, many of the airports are gearing themselves up, and you will see, take Manchester Airport as a prime example, a plane comes into park, currently it uses a diesel generator. There's 1,000 vehicles that never leave the airport boundary, so there's an opportunity to install refueling infrastructure at the airport that can kickstart that hydrogen economy at the airport. But the planes are coming. So in terms of the challenges, this is really the key points. There's not many refueling stations in the UK, there's 16. They are being developed more and more, and the hydrogen strategy will dictate some of that. The Office of Low Emission Vehicles is probably going to dictate some of that. So when we talk about electric vehicles, or we talk about ultra low emission vehicles, it's kind of the same thing, but the nature of the delivery will evolve as clear. So you can deliver hydrogen through road, you can transport it by tube trailer or examples like that. You can deliver it through pipeline, so Cadent, a gas network operator, focused on a project called HyNet, which is a £0.9 billion project, which is really looking at industrial decarbonisation at scale, but there's an opportunity to refuel transportation within that project. The hydrogen that is required for a PEM fuel cell, which is the most common type of fuel cell within a vehicle environment, has to be 99.99% pure, so it's pretty pure. That won't suit certain types of hydrogen, and what we're really focused on and what we should be focused on is either blue or green. Blue is where you capture the carbon and you store it in salt caverns or under Liverpool Bay, for example, where in the example of HyNet, or green is where it's completely powered by renewables. So how do we get hydrogen today? And it's been around for a while, and that's what I mentioned. 96% of the world's hydrogen is produced from fossil fuel sources. You can see the reaction in terms of steam methane reforming or water gas shift reaction, but ultimately we have to pursue and mandate that blue or green hydrogen example. In my mind, it has to be really green, but blue is the interim measure, and it will get us there in terms of the gas networks. So in terms of costs, what does it really compare in terms of costs? Hydrogen typically costs anywhere from £10 to £15 per kilogram of hydrogen. In California, it's a little bit cheaper, but you will need around 5 kilograms of hydrogen to drive 320 miles. That's the example of the Toyota Mirai. Hydrogen is in its infancy. It's probably 10 years of, well, when I say hydrogen, fuel cells are probably 10 years behind batteries. But what's accelerated batteries is clearly challenges like the Faraday Challenge, where there was a lot of government support. The hydrogen strategy will change that because the UK government wants to be a global leader in this area. In terms of the actual vehicle costs, yes, they are expensive, but the economies of scales aren't there to drive down the cost. Part of the research what we're doing is trying to reduce the cost. Some of the OEMs are trying to reduce the cost. But once the infrastructure is there and people start buying, clearly we've seen it with electric vehicles, the price will drop. So in terms of what we're doing here in this region, there's challenges associated with not just the technology, not just with the hydrogen problem. There's a strategy problem, there's a policy problem, and there's clearly a funding problem. So we've developed a hydrogen and fuel cell strategy for Greater Manchester, and what that really shows is in the next 5 years, what can we effectively do? Well, we can use the public sector fleet, heavy goods vehicle to lead that switch because it lends itself better to those types of vehicles. Again, this is no indifferent to some of the electric vehicle policy, but you can utilise air quality policy. We really do plan for that wider hydrogen refuelling station deployment because most of those 16 are probably down south. In fact, they are. There's one in Sheffield, but we're in the centre of Manchester. What about us? We need to evaluate hydrogen as a replacement for diesel rail because that's a really, really good opportunity and it can electrify the rail network without electrifying the overhead lines. We need to support hydrogen demonstration for heat, and that's part of the government plan within their 10-point plan. They want to generate 5 gigawatts of low-carbon hydrogen, and there's going to be £240 million going into new hydrogen production facilities. But by 2023 and 2025, we're going to have a hydrogen town and a hydrogen region. That's the plan. It accelerates within the next 5 years, and ultimately we haven't even considered looking at green hydrogen until 2031, but we do have the opportunity to accelerate. And I think that's key, and we've already done it. How have we done it? We have signed a new collaboration with the organisations at the top, so Electricity North West, Carlton Power, Cadent, Greater Manchester Combined Authority, Trafford Council, and ourselves at the university. We're a business and innovation hub at the university that is focused on hydrogen technology. Cadent are the gas network operator who clearly have a focus on hydrogen. Electricity North West know that electrifying everything isn't possible. And that's our homes, our transportation. I just don't think it's feasible. So what does this opportunity bring? Well, we can generate hydrogen, we can store hydrogen, we can produce hydrogen, but all of that hydrogen is going to be green because it's going to be tagged to a large solar PV array, and it's a sizable PV array. We're talking somewhere in the region of 10 megawatts. But what we really need to do for this is get that hydrogen production at less than £10 a kilogram. And that's probably where we're aiming at. And that's in parity with current diesel pricing. Hydrogen is going to be developed and available from Q4 2023. So we've accelerated it quite a lot. Our Q1 this project is going to planning in the next couple of weeks. What we need to do now is look at that focus. It's green hydrogen. It's completely, the same, the speaker earlier on mentioned that, we need to have renewables completely focused, and that's how we generate our energy. Same needs to be applied to this method. We need to complete that user engagement process, and that's getting the volume of hydrogen. We need to size that electrolyzer to scale. So that involves all of those heavy goods vehicles that we referenced within the strategy. How do we need to go and engage with all those organisations, get their baseload, get the baseload from the airport, get the baseload from the city council, get the baseload from any fleet operator that isn't looking at electric vehicles but could look at hydrogen alternatives, and that will size our infrastructure requirements. So on the right-hand side, you'll see really it's no different. You have a renewable source, you generate your hydrogen, you can store it. Curtailment of wind is a prime example. We spend £100 million a year on park turbines. That's a good example to use when hydrogen's possible, or any kind of energy storage is possible. In terms of general outlook and conclusions, hydrogen fuel cells use chemical energy in hydrogen to generate power, water and heat. Fuel cell electric vehicles have been deployed, and they're a promising technology for this sector. There are clearly challenges. Cost is clearly one, infrastructure is clearly another, and how we produce that hydrogen is critical. There's scientific challenges, but we answer that. We've got over 30 research staff working on various different projects. That will lead to reduction in the cost of fuel cells. There's organisations like Ballard, there's multiple fuel cell organisations that are reducing the cost of these. This UK hydrogen train was developed as a collaboration with the University of Birmingham, and that's being trialled. The big political challenge, and this is what a number of organisations are waiting for is government are releasing this hydrogen strategy which has pounds and pence attached to it. Germany launched one last year and it had a €9 billion price point attached to it. We've got to have that ambition because what we want to be in this area is a global leader. And we looked at it with wind and we weren't a global leader because we didn't manufacture any of those turbines ourselves. They were manufactured elsewhere. Yes, we installed a lot of them, but that's what we really need to focus on. And thank you very much. That's us. And if you want any more information, please do get in touch.
Thank you ever so much. Now, I'm sure a lot of businesses watching will have done exactly the same as me, that your ears prick up when you hear the words collaboration and billions of pounds. So for businesses out there watching thinking, fantastic, time for hydrogen, massive economy, particularly going to be active in the transportation sector, how can businesses get involved in that economy?
Well, there's twofold. If you're a business and you want to get involved in the sector, come and speak to us because we've got a £4 million facility where we've already supported nearly 100 businesses with various degrees of innovation. If you're a business that is interested in the use of hydrogen, then please do get in touch because we need to do that user engagement piece and to define that baseload for that tangible project that is happening. Or if you're a business that is thinking, as we were as a university, in our 2038 ambition, we're electrifying part of our estate. You know, we've got a huge estate in the centre of Manchester, but we can't electrify everything. So there's a consideration for gas. We can't have any opportunity to decarbonise our gas network because we don't own the gas network. But we're having conversations with the likes of Cadent to see, can we utilise some of that green hydrogen that is being produced in Greater Manchester to inform some of our estate strategy. So it's at multiple levels, or it's down to, even if you're interested in the skills element, we're working with Net Zero Northwest. You know, even in the Northwest, there's a £4 billion investment portfolio of projects around hydrogen and around CCUS and around net zero. They're ready to go, and we're leading the skills pathway for them. So I think let's stop talking about hydrogen in silo. Hydrogen is an electric vehicle, but hydrogen is part of the net zero story. And what does that net zero story tell us? Skills are important. We need to do something about that. Infrastructure is important. We need to do something about that. Research is clearly important, but it's not just research that is just sitting within an academic paper. It's research that's on the ground and turned into tangible projects.
Incredible, and so much opportunity there to make hydrogen part of that EV story. Now, you mentioned that the majority of these refuelling stations are in the south. I know that we're waiting on the strategy to come later this year, but are there already plans to increase the amount of hydrogen refuelling across the UK? Absolutely.
That initial project that was on the first slide with UK H2 Mobility, there's already plans in place. So if you take a UK organisation like ITM Power, they install electrolyzers. They've already gone to the market, secured funding, and they're going to match that with funding from whether it's government or the private sector. And their plan is to install hydrogen infrastructure up and down, I'd say, the M1, M6, wherever. But you've got the opportunity to do return to fleet. So the airport, prime example, they've got a lot of vehicles within and around Airport City. So if all of a sudden you get all those operators together, you've got something that has that economy of scale that you can put that infrastructure piece in. We're not just reliant on the hydrogen strategy. Yes, that will create that huge economic stimulus that is required, but there's already plans to install the Trafford Park one. Doesn't rely on any subsidy. It's reliant on the user engagement piece. If there's the demand for the hydrogen is there, well, that project, like I said, it's going into planning and by Q4 2023, which is amazing because many of the projects which are talking about hydrogen, it always boils back down to that piece. The hydrogen has to be green because then it doesn't make any kind of sense. It takes a lot more energy to create hydrogen than just using electricity alone. So it has to have a reason to do so. So if we're using renewables, the reason's there for me.
Fantastic, and yeah, always really useful to come back to that. But you know, if it's not renewable, it's not going to be the right thing for us to do now. Now, we have had a question come through on the chat, which I'm going to pose to you rather than saying to the end, because it is more to do with the hydrogen. Okay. So we've had conversations quite a lot around hydrogen ultimately being piped into homes and hydrogen boilers. Yeah. Would that give people the option to have a hydrogen vehicle that they can charge at home, or is that just not how the infrastructure is going to work?
I mean, the honest answer is I don't know, but what is being mandated, we have to get rid of the existing combi boilers that we all use. If you look back in the 60s, 70s, there was a huge replacement program where we already had hydrogen in the gas network, and then they went and changed all the appliances. If you blend anything over 20% hydrogen into the gas network Now, you have to change all the appliances. And there are trials going on where there's 20% blend going in at various different locations across the UK. What does that really give you? Well, it gives you the opportunity to cook, it gives you the opportunity to heat your home, same sort of thing. We can't electrify all our homes because 80% of our current power requirement comes from gas. So we need to do something about that. Whether that gives you an option, we've looked at this from our own estate and we were looking at a combined heat and power option with the option of trigeneration. Can we utilise that combined heat and power system to generate hydrogen to consider for our fleet operations? Still up in the air.
Fantastic.
And it is possible.
I think sometimes that's quite exciting, isn't it? When the answer is just, we don't know, that says to me, if somebody's watching this and thinking that just makes sense and it should happen, the funding there, the political will's there, this is what we need to be doing. So hopefully somebody might come up with that solution for us. So thank you ever so much for joining us.
No problem.
And we're going to move on now to a slightly different angle, but still looking around the charging infrastructure and particularly for EVs. So delighted to welcome on stage next Paul George from Drax.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Paul George. I think it's first off a couple of thank yous for the organisers today for setting up such a brilliant event, and a big thank you to Electricity North West for giving us the opportunity to speak today. I think it goes without saying, the wider Drax EV Solutions team, an absolute pleasure and privilege to be standing in front of you today. So I'm going to talk to you for the next 10 to 15 minutes around some of the work that we've been doing to help support businesses across the UK in terms of the electrification journey, and more importantly in terms of how they're deploying electric vehicle service equipment. So first off, just a quick introduction to Drax as an organisation. Some of you may well be aware of who we are, and we are a critical player in terms of the UK electricity infrastructure. Our purpose as a group is around enabling a zero carbon, lower cost energy future for all our clients. And our strategy is around building long-term sustainable biomass, the leading provider of power system stability in the UK, but also more importantly, it's about giving our customers transparency and control of their energy consumption. And I think there's been a few comments today already around the government's aspirations around net zero for 2050. Drax has a rather ambitious objective, and has to become carbon negative by 2030. This is primarily underpinned by the BECCS solution that we have, or our Drax Power Station, which was the conversion of biomass units into burning of pellets. So ultimately, we see the EV infrastructure as a long-term strategic move for Drax. So traditionally, we've been involved in the electrical generation and electrical supply through our Drax Customers brand, being Haven Power and Opus Energy. But like I say, we've been watching the market really closely over the past 3 years and trying to be ahead of the curve in terms of the impact of electric vehicle and the electric vehicle charging on the UK infrastructure. So I think just to touch upon the UK energy landscape as it stands today. What we see at the moment is a real perfect storm in the sense that we see a decentralisation from the national grid. We're seeing, again, as Keith mentioned earlier in the slide deck, around the transition from the DNO into the DSO. So that's really putting more responsibility on those local operators in terms of managing the network. I think we're also seeing the decarbonisation. So we see a big increase in the number of renewables on the system. What this means is it drives intermittency from generation perspective. If the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, that can ultimately drive price volatility. So in terms of I'll draw your attention to the slide behind me, and ultimately what we're seeing here is already localised constraint networks across the UK. We know that the national grid and the energy systems operator are going to be incentivising more businesses to create on-site flexibility to support that intermittent generation. But we're acutely aware of the the situation is going to be exacerbated by the increased demand on electric vehicles and charging on the network. So ultimately, this is our key interest, and this is something we're very keen to support our clients on in terms of how we navigate them through this journey. So moving from the electrical side into the vehicle piece. Again, Keith mentioned earlier on some different classifications in terms of the types of electric vehicles that are on the road at the moment. And I think for the purpose of this slide, I'll draw your attention to some of the detail, but ultimately this is focusing on BEVs. So electric vehicles in its purest sense, battery electric vehicles. And this data on the slide is taken from two sources, and there's different dynamics at play. But ultimately what it's showing you, I appreciate it's a busy slide, but ultimately we're showing you the 2019-2020 comparison year on year in terms of BEV sales. So on the bottom horizontal line, you can see that the month-on-month view in terms of sales from 2019 versus 2020. And you can also see some lines meandering from left to right in terms of the cumulative EV sales for that year. The important things to take from this slide is that ultimately this was created before the government's announcement to ban ICE vehicles after 2030. So what we're seeing in this slide is absolutely going to be accelerated over the next months and years. I think the key takeaways from this is that battery electric vehicle sales increased by about 185% from 2019 to 2020, which is a significant increase. And the actual sales surpassed conservative government predictions and National Grid predictions. So if you look very closely, you can see three horizontal lines, which represent the National Grid's future energy scenario in terms of consumer transformation, system transformation, and leading the way. And important to note that 2020 was close to really hitting the kind of conservative estimate of consumer transformation. So this is an absolute understatement, but ultimately what we're saying is that the overall BEV sales and the growth in this space is going to rise at a real alarming pace over the next decade. To put some more colour onto that statement for you, from 2021 to 2025, we envisage around a 42% year-on-year growth in terms of battery electric vehicle sales. Beyond 2025 to 2030, we anticipate that to be about 962% year-on-year. Worth noting, however, that, again, previous forecasts have been surpassed by the performance of the battery electric vehicle sales. So we wait anxiously to see the results of this year. So we've spoke about the electrical transition and what's happening in the marketplace at the moment. But I think the key thing is for customers and businesses of all sizes, public sector and private sector, is what are the mechanisms and what are the support mechanisms and tools available to them to help them embark on this electrification journey, but more importantly, how they're going to stimulate that growth and support that growth. So a really quick slide, which will just kind of detail the policy and legislative landscape, which details the grant schemes and incentives that are available to businesses in the UK. I won't dwell too much on the detail, but ultimately what we're seeing is a kind of a split between infrastructure, which is kind of covered by the workplace charging grant. So businesses looking to install electric vehicle charge points are applicable for an OZEV grant, which is £350 per socket, up to a maximum of 40 sockets. Really important to know, and again, being from an energy background, that we see a lot of fundings and pots of money available to support low carbon generation or energy management. It's a pot of money that once it's gone, it will be gone. I think the most important thing to realise is that kind of the post-subsidy world is a real keen interest for Drax at the moment. We're trying to gather as much information as we can to kind of foresee what's going to happen beyond this kind of post-subsidy world. What I would envisage is that if the workplace charging grant does dissipate, then what will happen is that there will be it will morph into some other scheme which will still support and provide the stimulus for the drive and EV growth. In terms of the super deduction tax, there's things available from the government in terms of capital allowance. So if a company is going to be investing in EV infrastructure, absolutely this can be covered in the super deduction tax. Really important to note as well that this does not cover the infrastructure per se or the installation. This is primarily going to be around the hardware. But for those vehicles that are going to be looking to electrify their fleet, there's a number of grants available in terms of procuring those vehicles at the moment. So again, more importantly, the key focus for us, this is what the landscape is today. I think a lot of businesses have that curiosity is what's coming down the line. So that's something we as a team look really closely on. So I think what I wanted to do today is articulate some of the work that we've been doing with some of our clients, but more importantly, give you the view through the customer's lens, because that's kind of what really helped us shape the Drax EV solution, if you like, is working really closely on the inside with some of our key supply customers to really understand the types of challenges that they faced, their aspirations and their objectives, and more importantly, how can we help them achieve what they're trying to achieve. And just some salient points on the slide is that it's really around seeing the bigger picture. We've worked with lots of organisations that kind of narrow the focus in terms of the electric vehicle charging points. But one of the things that we consistently advise our clients is around providing a broader, unique focus. And what I mean by that is not just about the vehicles, there's a real play on the energy piece here. And it's about businesses, not consumers. And what I mean by that is businesses need to move away from thinking about investment in EV infrastructure as a consumer. They need to really put the hat in terms of what is this going to do for our business? How can we drive our business forward? How can we insulate our business? How can we make the business more sustainable? And it's about simplicity, pulling simplicity through complexity. It is a complex market, and there's a lot of components within the solution. So really driving simplicity for our customers to make sure that they can focus on their core business is absolutely critical, again, for public, private sector organisations. The other key component is around the hardware itself, a critical component in the whole jigsaw. The hardware that we install on customer sites needs to be future-proofed, and it needs to be agnostic, and ultimately it needs to serve the requirements of that business, and in turn, the potential vehicles of that organisation, the clients that they're serving with the vehicles on the road. So it's that integration of how can we improve our business performance with the integration of electric vehicle and electric vehicle infrastructure. I've mentioned future-proof, and this is probably the most salient point for us, because we always encourage our clients to kind of take a short, medium and longer term view, and that's really important because no organisation that we've seen today has really approached the EV conundrum and kind of catered for 2021, 2030's needs in one hit. We see a real phased approach, and that's a really critical aspect of the whole process, and I will pick up on that on a slide a little bit later. But ultimately, that future-proofing will allow customers to think about the long-term solution. So not just thinking about installing charge points at a site, but thinking about the integration with the wider business. A flexible approach. Again, there's been a number of slides, I think, from Keith earlier on around that integration with behind-the-meter generation. So again, it's thinking about you might be putting charge points in a certain location today, but what's your future aspirations and how you're going to achieve that, and making sure that the infrastructure and the solution will support that growth aspiration. And again, around the optimising the assets. We bring in an energy theme from Drax. I think the key thing is understanding the key role that energy will play in terms of servicing the electric vehicles. So, in terms of the customer journey, so what I want to show on this slide is that there's a very generic conversations around electric vehicle and energy right across the industry, but we find some very unique ways in which the customers address this challenge. So this slide will kind of map out the key stages from electrification perspective. Some organisations, again, public, private sector, might just be thinking about installing charge points, whether that be for staff, visitors, or the commercial fleet. Ultimately, once those charge points are installed, they might think about, well, how do we electrify the fleet? We have an existing fleet of vehicles. How do we electrify that? And I think the important thing is it's a big, big cost base for our customers in terms of the procuring of the vehicles, the fuel, insurance, total cost of ownership of that. And it's understanding and providing a forensic analysis for our customers in terms of what makes sense today in terms of electrifying the fleet. Typically, we provide analysis around telematics, so it's the integration of telematics and fleet and driver behaviour to really then pull through what makes most sense for the customer to electrify today, tomorrow, and kind of the longer term. So we've got charge points installed on a site. We've got vehicles, whether it be company cars, commercial vehicles, utilising those charge points. Again, as an energy company at heart, we work with lots of very discerning energy management organisations who have a lot of demand-side response. They have a lot of energy efficiency activities running within the building. And what's really important is that any work that kind of takes place in the car park in terms of the installation of charge points doesn't unravel the great work that's happening within the building. So bringing the two kind of power demands together, the demand from the building and demand from the electric vehicles in the car park, bringing that together and actually smart charging and load managing that, really thinking about how you can optimize your costs to charge the vehicles. The next stage is typically around behind the meter. So again, we have organizations with generative assets behind the meter solutions, whether that be battery, solar, wind. And then the question comes around how can they power their vehicles from that behind the meter generation? The key thing around this is obviously improving their green credentials. But again, back to my earlier point around building business resiliency, how can you insulate your business? How can you insulate your operations with this by using the assets that are currently on site? I think the last stage, again, Keith mentioned this in the slide, it's really, really pertinent. So away from the install of charge points, the functionality of this will grow. And customers are becoming more and more mature in this space from an energy generation perspective. But more importantly, how they're going to integrate that energy generation with a large fleet of vehicles that are potentially on their portfolio. So we've heard about vehicle to grid, building to grid. At the moment in the UK, most of the V2G are commercial or on a trial basis. It's a real learning process, a real test bed, but we'll probably be seeing more movement towards the end of the year. But ultimately, again, this has been mentioned before, but how do you optimize the assets? The electric vehicle charging points are assets. How do we optimize it? How can we ensure that, again, from a cost and efficiency perspective, it's managed appropriately? So again, from monetizing perspective, the ability to access grid trading and balancing systems is available with a fleet of vehicles through vehicle to grid charging. So I think just looking at that kind of map, if you like, that roadmap, is the key thing on this is, you know, there's a real shift from point 1 to point 5, and that shift is around energy as a cost center. Typically, organizations look at energy, they receive a monthly invoice from their supplier, they see it wholly as a cost center. We're trying to encourage the shift in terms of how businesses think about energy and EVs as well, in terms of viewing energy as a cost center and energy as an asset. How can you make it, how can an original CapEx project begin to earn revenue for you and optimize your kind of wider business operations? So that's kind of really the journey that a lot of our key customers kind of a lot curious about, and how do they navigate this kind of road. So this slide, if you like, is, I've brought this in because I thought it was really pertinent in the sense that we've been working and engaging with lots of organizations over the past 3 years. And the 4 kind of statements or questions on the screen, if you like, there's a consistent theme that keeps cropping up, again, of businesses of all sizes across different sectors. So what we've heard is that the market has multiple and niche suppliers. We have hardware manufacturers, charge point manufacturers, we have software manufacturers, we have EV OEMs. Navigating that can be very complex, and it will ultimately impact decision-making process within an organization, typically making it a hell of a lot harder. It's then managing those suppliers. So again, multiple suppliers and collaboration coming into the mix to deliver a solution for a client. Managing those suppliers can sometimes dilute the output of that solution. So it's really important that collaboration is key, and there's a real unified approach in terms of how this strategy is going to be implemented. And one of the key questions we received from a lot of our clients was around, will we receive ongoing support? So we've got charge points installed. How on earth do we receive ongoing support to make sure that we don't get distracted from our core business and we can focus on our core business while begin to optimize and operate the EV charging infrastructure? And I think the last point on this one was something that cropped up an awful lot, is that it's not just about plug and go. There's a real energy focus on this. And we make no apologies for right the way through our process, we take a full view in terms of electrical assessment for our customers, because ultimately it's the electrons that are going to be powering the vehicles. So I've mentioned a lot around future-proofing, and I think the key thing on this slide is there's 3 key pillars in terms of how you might go about future-proofing your site or your estate. The first one is around the electrical assessment. Again, it's been talked around today around localized constraints on networks. But again, the recommendation would be to take a short, medium, long-term view. Ultimately, you want to be laying the foundations today for growth tomorrow. Therefore, Laying infrastructure now can have a cost-effective benefit to organisations because they're not unravelling lots of work that happens in the phase one. They're simply adding on and scaling up in terms of the addition of charge points moving forward. And again, I think the key thing is take a phased approach based on the needs of the operation. We've seen organisations that have been early adopters in this space that have gone in and tried to achieve, their aspirations in one hit, and mistakes do prove costly. So again, it's about taking an incremental year-on-year view on what the business needs and how that aligns to the investment for EV infrastructure. I think, again, on the infrastructure and site review, this is really, really key in terms of the whole piece, because it is pointless putting electric vehicle charging structure in if there is no capacity to support that. So, again, one of our key focus is understanding the electrical play on this, understanding site capacity, D&O constraints, civil works, distribution boards, even down to the metering elements of non-half-hourly and half-hourly meter requirements. But ultimately, what we want to do is create a site review that gives that customer some comfort and assurance in mapping out that short, medium, long-term view. And I think the hardware is really, really important. We term ourselves as a hardware agnostic solution in the sense that we can mix and match in terms of the hardware we deploy on customer sites. We've heard a lot about fast charging, rapid charging, AC, DC charging, and ultimately, there's a business case and a business requirement for it, but the ability to grow as EV technology increases year on year, which it is, how can you integrate those new technologies into your existing estate? So ultimately, our solution is kind of OCPP, very software driven, which is Open Charge Point Protocol, which is ultimately a communication marriage between the software that we operate as a CPO, as a charge point operator, into the command and control of the charge points themselves. So again, what we're saying here is that as EV technology grows and the EV OEMs improve their product, scalability is absolutely the forefront of what we put in front of our customers. So I've mentioned around thinking beyond the plugs. I think, again, the three components to this is there's an EV discovery. It's understanding the fleet operations and requirements, vehicle suitability, building the cost base, the business case, total cost of ownership. There's an EV implementation, there's a charge point puzzle. It's a trilemma. There's the vehicle, there's the charge points, there's the operation and keep up. How do you bring these three things together to ensure that you deliver on your investment? So the charge point puzzle in terms of user-based groupings, access tariffs, ongoing project management, and then it's the upkeep of those charge points as well. So how can you optimize it? How can you make sure that this investment is going to pay back in the short, medium, and longer term? So we always encourage our customers to think beyond the plugs. As I say, many narrow the focus in terms of the installation of the charge points, but as we've seen on the previous slide, that is essentially the first point of the journey. So you've looked at the fleet review, we've looked at the infrastructure review, you've assessed the site power review, both at D&O and on site. How do you begin, so you've implemented a solution, how can you begin then to take a phase one, get the key learnings from that and apply that to phase two? So how can you continuously improve the solution? How we do that is through data-driven insights. So again, we've worked with organisations where we've gone and done lots of great things in terms of installation, integration behind the meter generation, but how do we continuously evolve the solution for our customers? How do we interrogate the different components in the solution, from driver to vehicle behaviour, to energy consumption, to understanding the locations of drivers, and bringing that all together to essentially make informed business decisions for that phase two and phase three approach of the customer's journey. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and there's probably a lot to take in with that, but some key aspects to it is around think longer term, think beyond the plugs, take a short, medium, long-term view, and ultimately measure the performance of that initial solution that's implemented.
Thanks ever so much, Paul. As you say, it has to be a whistle-stop tour, because once you start scratching the surface, there is just so much to think about. And For the people watching, I'm sure you'll have taken away the same as me, that this isn't going anywhere. It's just going to keep accelerating. So if you're thinking about your energy strategy and your EV strategy, now is the time, because it's not going to go anywhere. So our next speaker is from Kinetic Traction, and Andrew's going to talk us through some more innovative solutions to the charging infrastructure.
I'm Andrew Goodwin here from Kinetic Traction, and I just wanted to say thank you to Electricity North West for inviting us to speak here today. We're going to talk about our SaberCharge ultra-fast electric vehicle charging product. And so what we got into this market because we really wanted to solve the problem for the 40% of people that aren't able to charge at home. An awful lot of the owners of EVs at the moment, they actually can charge at home, but as things develop, as people buy EVs, as responding to the government target of only selling electric vehicles from 2030, we know there's going to be a problem there where 40% of people can't charge at home. So how do you respond to that? And the CCS2 standard for charging allows us now to charge up to 350 kilowatts. That's really interesting to us because it allows you to get a full tank in nearly 10 minutes, half a tank in 5 minutes. It's very similar to going to a petrol station at the moment. And that's a DC charging standard, so you're directly connecting to the battery at that point. It allows us to charge much faster than we could have done previously. The vehicles aren't quite there yet. I think one of the fastest vehicles you can buy in the UK can charge at maybe 275 kilowatts, but not quite 350 yet, but they're getting there. That's the direction of travel. And you've already got these chargers available on the motorway networks in small numbers, and we're going to see more and more of them coming. We're also interested in the 75 kilowatt charger. We think that's a real sweet spot for charging because that allows you to charge, you can get 75 miles in about 15 minutes. Again, it's a real convenience if you need a quick charge, and that's really going to help the adoption of EVs to the people that haven't got an ability to charge at home. So the question with the 350 kilowatt chargers is, where do you get the power from? If you've got 10 350 kilowatt chargers, you need 3.5 megawatts. And this is really where our experience on the traction networks comes in. Traditionally, Kinetic Traction, we've been involved in traction power substations, and the railways have a huge amount of power. Most traction networks on each section of track will have a 3 megawatt substation, usually at each end of that section of track. So you might have 6 megawatts of power available, and that power is only being used actually when the train's accelerating. The train uses a small amount of that power as it's going along, but most of the time it's only used when it's accelerating, and that could typically be once every 10 to 15 minutes. The rest of the time that power just sits there, it's available, it's already paid for, it's an asset that's in place, but it's not actually being fully utilized. So our SaberCharge systems are designed to make use of that surplus power. They can adjust the charge power in real time, in milliseconds, and measure the current and the voltage in that location. That allows us to charge vehicles very rapidly using surplus power of infrastructure that's already in place. And that means several things. It means that you've got much faster charging in railway station locations. It means that you can deploy it very, very quickly because the power infrastructure is already there. And it's very convenient. The railway locations are actually very well placed for charging hubs because in a railway you typically have a car park, you might have a coffee shop. They tend to be located where people actually live, and they're ideally suited to the electric vehicle charging network. This particular project that's on the screen at the moment, this is supported by Transport for Wales, and this is a proof of concept project that we're going to be doing shortly and showing that the system can respond. And what we don't want to do is affect the railway in any way. It's a very straightforward system. It's patent pending for that reason. And what we do is we measure the current and the voltage on the transformer. We also measure the temperature of the transformer to make sure that we're not getting anywhere near overloading it. The one thing we do not want to do is affect the rail operations in any way. All we're doing is using the surplus power and measuring that surplus power in real time, and we can then adjust the charge. As far as the customer's concerned, charging the electric vehicle, it might mean if a train goes by, it might mean the charger will reduce its charge current for 30 seconds or so and then ramp back up. The customer really doesn't even notice the difference. So it's an ideal location to put charging hubs, and that's why we're working with Transport for Wales to do that. The SaberCharge technology is also applicable to urban locations, and we have another ongoing project to prove this systems out. And in the UK, we've got 400,000 substations. That can be anything from a primary substation to a secondary substation, as shown on the screen at the moment. And each one of those potentially could be a rapid charging location. Those substations are designed for the highest capacity on the system. So typically, domestic capacity peaks at about 6 p.m. in the afternoon. Throughout the rest of the day and in the mornings, there's spare capacity just by the very nature. The electricity network has to be larger than the actual supply. So you're always going to have some level of surplus capacity. And the thing about charging is it's flexible. It's not like if you put a 200 kilowatt motor onto a network, you need 200 kilowatts available. If you put a 200 kilowatt charger onto a network, you only actually need a small amount of power available, and as the power becomes available, you can ramp it up or ramp it down as necessary. So it adjusts in real time. So we're great believers in the smart grid. The best smart grid is a simple grid. We've been talking about smart grids for 20 years now in the power industry, and the smart grid is, excuse me, so the thing about smart grids is we want to keep it really, really simple. A lot of the smart grids are based on the macro level, and they'll look at how the macro grid is coping with the power required. At a local level, we are just looking at the current and the voltage that's available in that secondary substation and adjusting for that. So that's why we measure the temperature, and that's why we measure the current and the voltage. And it allows it to adapt very, very quickly indeed. There's no reason why we can't also adapt that to rural locations, and we've got an ongoing project. We're working with a local DNO here for rural locations. This is quite an issue in the when you look at these locations where people go to visit. You know, they're locations that aren't used very regularly, but in the future people are going to want to take their electric vehicles to beauty spots and so on. And we can also apply the SaberCharge technology to those locations. So again, we're just measuring the current and the voltage, adjusting and utilizing the surplus power in those locations. And the other thing is it allows us to deploy much faster than you would do otherwise. In a sort of typical charging hub location, you might want to put in a substation, and that's going to take an awful long time because then you have to deploy the overhead lines. You need to work with the local authority, and you need to install the transformer and everything that, you know, the cost associated with that, but also the time associated with that. The SaberCharge systems utilize existing technology and we utilize the surplus capacity. So our strategy is really to roll these systems out into railway stations and urban and rural locations where we've already got infrastructure in place. There's 2,500 railway stations in the UK, and there's 400,000 substations in the UK, each one of those having the potential to become a charging location. So this is just a summary of the Sabercharge systems. So the CCS2 standard, again, allows us to charge in, you can get half a tank in 5 minutes. And that for the people that living in flats or tower blocks or anything, that's fantastic, because it means that your vehicle then becomes much more like what you used to, where you can just go to the petrol station, or in this case, possibly the railway station, to fill up. We're using existing infrastructure, so we're using existing substations, and it's much cheaper and faster deployment. This opens up whole new markets as well. I mean, in the future, you might go to the railway station, instead of getting to go on a train, you might go to the railway station actually to fill your car with electricity. And it's retrofittable as well. So we're making use of that existing infrastructure, and we retrofit onto that. And the controls in there prevents it getting affected by the new system. Okay. So we've got a bit of time for questions now. Just to let you know, we're actively looking for railway sites, urban locations, and rural locations for the ongoing projects that we've got at the moment.
Thank you, Andrew. What a fantastically exciting business model, that we know we have that additional capacity, we know what users want, and it feels like you've really joined those pieces in quite an exciting way. For people who want to find out more, and I know you've mentioned you're looking for sites, what do they need to do now?
Yeah, just get in contact with me. The contact details are right on the slides there, and we'll talk through those locations. And yeah, even if it's a grid-constrained site where you couldn't normally attach to, we're interested to look at it because of our technology.
Brilliant. So it sounds like the appetite is there, and I'm sure we're going to see this company go from strength to strength, and really exciting changes to the way that we can do things. If you do have any other questions around this area, either direct them directly to Andrew or send them through on the chat, and we will pick them up separately. So from the very technical aspect of EVs, we're going to come to the human element, the people who actually use those EVs. And I'm delighted now to have a video interview with Bridget Phelps, Chair of EVA England, to talk about the EV community.
I'm delighted next to be joined by Bridget, and she has a real passion for EVs, and I'm delighted that she's been able to join us via video link to talk a little bit around her EV journey and the work that she's currently involved in. So if I could just ask you first of all, Bridget, to tell me who you are and where you come from.
My name's Bridget Phelps. I live in the south, I live in Winchester, and I'm a director of EVA England.
Wonderful. And can you tell me a little bit about what EVA England is and how the organisation came about?
Well, we're a lockdown organisation. We are a group of people who haven't all met together, actually. We worked entirely over Zoom, having our first meeting at the end of March 2020. And what we are is a group of volunteers who came together to form a membership and advocacy organisation for electric vehicle drivers and prospective electric vehicle drivers in England. There are a number of consumer associations like this around the world, and we were particularly inspired by the one in Scotland and in the Netherlands and Norway and the US. And actually there's now a huge growth in these organisations across the globe. So we set ourselves up and we formally registered as a non-profit community interest company in June 2020.
Wonderful. So I keep wanting to say the journey, and it sounds like a pun every time I say it in relation to electric vehicles. But can you tell us a bit why you have that passion for EV? Like, what is the benefit of moving towards electric vehicles?
Well, there are a number of benefits, and the benefits will probably appeal in different ways to different drivers and consumers. One of the things is actually they are great to drive. They're very quiet, they accelerate very well, and they're easy to maintain because they don't have a clutch or gears. So it's well worth trying, and there's a lot of car enthusiasts who absolutely love them. They've got lower running costs as well, because the fuel and maintenance and the total cost of ownership looks as if it is lower than petrol or diesel vehicles. Above all else, clean air is a real issue in many of our cities, and not just in cities. And electric vehicles have zero tailpipe emissions of CO2, NOx and particulates. That's the battery electric vehicles. And the hybrid ones have the ability for zero emission running. And actually that can make a real difference to the quality of our air and have a real impact on the health of local people. And that is an issue which is just growing around in awareness. And as many people will know, there's a really good Clean Air Day every year, and the next one is on the 17th of June. So if you've adopted EVs, join Clean Air Day and publicise what you're doing.
Wonderful. There's such a nice range of benefits there. And what I loved is that you started from it with the perspective of it just being something that's good to drive, because I think sometimes that's missed in the conversation, that we almost feel like we need to force people into EVs, where actually they can be a very attractive proposition. And a lot of our audience today are watching from Greater Manchester, and our air is terrible, essentially. So it's estimated that 1,300 people in the region die prematurely every year because of the quality of air. We know there's schools in the region where children can't play outside for more than 15 minutes. Schools can't have windows open because of that quality of air. And I think sometimes that's the real immediate benefit. So we will definitely be encouraging people to get involved in it and to promote that Clean Air Day. And people watching today as both individuals and businesses are perhaps in that EV curious stage. And I'm sure you'll hear this over and over again, there is this sense of range anxiety, a lack of understanding of the charging network for where it is now and where it needs to be. So could you tell us a little bit about those conversations you've had? And I understand there's some research that you've been involved in as well.
Yes, let me share that with you. The government has recently, one of the main drivers for change, obviously, is the government deciding in November last year that basically petrol and diesel sales of new cars should be phased out largely from 2030. And since then, well, obviously in lockdown also, the market for EVs has grown hugely, and the government and a number of other players have been working extremely busily, and obviously Electricity North West and the EV strategy fits into that, really looking at how we work over the next 10 years to put everything in place to reassure consumers. And the charging network is one of those issues where people have real or perceived concerns about how easy it is to charge their cars. So the government decided to do a consultation on issues that they thought should be addressed to make it easier for consumers to have confidence in the charging network. And this consultation has just recently closed, but basically EVA England undertook a survey to explore with consumers what were the concerns that consumers wanted to see addressed by the government, and to use those responses to a detailed survey to inform our response. So we had over 1,200 current EV drivers responding. And basically, consumers were particularly concerned to see the ease of charging made greater. So, for instance, one of the things is that people want to be able to charge using contactless cards and to know that they'll be able to do that across the charging network. They would like to know that there are 24-hour helplines in case they have problems with chargers, because that would provide great reassurance. So that's another point. They would like the system to be simplified so that basically it is easier for drivers to be able to roam. So the ability to have one smartphone app across all public charge point networks. So a greatly simplified situation from the current situation where early electric vehicle drivers have accessed the network through quite a multiplicity of different apps and charging solutions. People also believe that it would be very helpful to have access to accurate real-time data about whether charge points are available, which would help them basically to be sure that they can charge when they get to a destination. And of course, many people will have charge points at home. And if I can just make a plug for that, because the government grants are there for people to install domestic charge points. But the public charging network, which the government is looking at implementing these improvements in, is still very important because a lot of people will still be using it. So we think that these improvements, combined with the real expansion of charge points that's happening very fast all over the UK, will really increase consumer confidence in charging their cars.
Fantastic. And it sounds on the face of it, and I'm sure the people who are involved in this will know it's more complicated, but it's around getting the EV charging system to the same level as we expect from other services, that we know if it's there or not, we can use it easily and we can start to plan around it. And I'm hopeful that those changes are going through. And for those people watching either live or on the recording of this, we will link through to the research that's been mentioned. So if you want to have a look through that in more detail, that will be available for you to do so. So next, Bridget, if I could just ask you, if you are a business or an individual and you're perhaps now a little bit more assured about what's going on with the charging network and the government and private response to that, what would your advice be if somebody is considering either making the change in their individual car or making the change kind of larger scale within their business towards electrification?
Well, I think for individuals, as we're coming out of this lockdown period, and also this year as we have COP26 and decarbonising transport and electrifying transport is so important, I think we'd like to encourage people to actually try driving an EV just to get the experience. And in the Northwest, there is an active EV Drivers Northwest group, which you'll find on Facebook, and the link will be in the materials for the conference. And I'm sure they will be organising events. And also the National Federated Dealers Association have an EV Assured scheme where you can find dealers who are accredited in selling electric vehicles. And basically, again, you could go to a dealer and you could try an EV and get the experience of driving it, even if it isn't, if you're not sure or if it's not a possibility for you at this moment. It will give you the sense of what it's like and what the discussion is around and what they're like to drive. If you're a business also, obviously there's a lot of information available online. There's a lot of available information through Electricity Northwest. And in many ways, the fleets have led the way. And that's fantastic because also the role that fleets and businesses can play is really helping us to get a really good growing second-hand market for EVs, which we're obviously going to need. Because not everybody's going to be able to buy a new EV. Although leasing actually is really, there can be some very, very good deals there. So in terms of businesses, I think it is, employees are definitely interested in green transport and the opportunity to get grants for installing workplace charging. The opportunity to look this year at what you can do with your fleet is something that's well worth progressing. And obviously also for taxi drivers and private hire vehicles, again, really good opportunities to look at EVs and whether they're a possibility to use because again of the benefits which will benefit everybody in the community.
Wonderful. So so just really to summarise that advice, and I suppose it's that try before you buy, like go out, get the experience of doing it, and really positive to hear that second-hand market is coming through, because I know that has kind of put people off whether they want to buy a new vehicle. So really great to hear that second-hand market's picking up. So I'm sure most of you listening to that, if you're not already an EV owner, you will be no doubt at least EV curious. As Bridget's mentioned, we will put links through to the various organisations, get involved with other groups who are already driving those EVs, ask those questions, and we will point you all in the right direction. So thanks ever so much for joining us, Bridget, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you so much. And can I just thank Electricity Northwest for organising this event. It's great to promote EVs and it's a very, very exciting time.
such a great conversation with Bridget there, really looking at that build of EV community. And we've got a real privilege today to chat to someone who has probably more insight than anyone else into EV consumer behaviour, that we're joined today by Mark at Auto Trader. So could I ask you first of all, Mark, to explain a little bit about what your role is within Auto Trader?
Of course, yeah, quite the build-up. I'm not sure I've got quite that much insight, but hopefully I can give you some. Yeah, so my role at Auto Trader is principally around working with the data that we've got. So we have we're a really, really well-known, huge website. We're in the top 20 visited websites in the UK with over 10 million visitors every month. But what that gives us, apart from a great big audience, is a huge amount of data. And my role at Auto Trader is to figure out why it is people are considering the cars they're considering, what decisions they're making, trying to work out why they buy the cars they buy, that kind of thing, and to find useful insights within that, and especially on the subject of electric vehicles that will help accelerate adoption.
Fantastic. And it's probably fair to say when most people hear the words Auto Trader, they know the website, they know what you do, they perhaps don't immediately think leaders in sustainability, but you kind of really are. There's some fantastic work going on. Why is sustainability so important to Auto Trader?
The business, there's two big reasons really that we believe we've got a role to play in sustainability. One of those, just to touch on, is the scale of the platform. So Auto Trader is the best known and the biggest website for car buyers in the UK, as I've mentioned. What that brings with it is a level of responsibility because, let's face it, cars pollute. We know that, and we feel, because of the scale of the platform and the size of the audience, that we have a role to play in helping Britain get to its 2030 commitment. The second thing is the culture of our business. We have a really, really vibrant culture with really strong values and employees that want to make societal change. Two big reasons: responsibility to kind of the industry and to consumers, but also to our people. And there's lots of activity around that. You know, we've got a really active framework of things like networks and guilds, and the Sustainability Network is one of the most active, driven by people that really, really care passionately about reversing climate change and challenging the business to do things to help with that. And there are all sorts of activities going on around, you know, the catering, local sourcing, that kind of thing. But also carbon literacy training, which is a big deal for us in 2020, 19 and this year. Half of our workforce by the end of the year will be carbon literacy accredited. So we've really got a real commitment for those two principal reasons.
Incredible. And people watching this will see some real echoes with the Electricity North West journey, that they see that responsibility to the region and the world. You know, climate change is a global issue, but also really being driven by that engagement with staff and also going through that carbon literacy accreditation. So when you start then looking at that consumer data, what does the picture look like for EVs?
It's so interesting. We're trying to use the data in three core ways, really. First of all, there's the platform and our capability and the number of people we talk to. How can we help consumers make more environmentally friendly choices? That's kind of theme number one. We then are talking to the retailers that we work with. There are 13,000 retailers advertising cars on a platform. You know, that is so many people who have responsibility to explain to consumers what an electric vehicle does, why it might be the right choice for them. The manufacturers themselves we talk to. And then lastly, the third group is government and policymakers and industry bodies and those kind of things. Now, in the case of consumers, our key thing is to try to explain to them why an EV might be the right choice, and we do that through a bunch of different ways, of course. We have a really strong editorial platform, both on Auto Trader itself, but on YouTube and on other social platforms. There are reviews of vehicles and explainers and all those sorts of things. Why is an EV a good choice for you? Why is this particular EV? What does kilowatts per hour mean? What does charging look like? How do you do things with an electric car? So there's a whole load of activity around that. On the platform itself, promoting EVs is something that we've taken really seriously, more recently actually, because we see that there's a groundswell of people now adding an EV to their sort of shopping basket. That's the sort of terminology we use. And it's all building towards COP26 at the end of the year, of course, which is going to be a really big deal. So at the moment, if you were to visit Auto Trader today, you'd see an electric car giveaway. If anyone fancies that, by the way, Tesla Model 3 is yours for this month.
They're literally across the road. We should be back shortly.
So lots of activities around marketing, but also on the platform to try to raise awareness of why an electric vehicle might be the right choice for consumers. And added to that, using the experience on the site to explain to people what range looks like, what the battery life looks like, to give people a sense of fair pricing, and how to compare an electric car to a traditional petrol or diesel car. So that's kind of the role of the platform. To come back to your question on what's happening and who's considering electric vehicles, that's the key thing that we've seen has been missing from lots of planning and lots of conversations over the last few years. And that's the data that we're able to bring to bear into the conversation. And that's why hopefully we can help organisations watching today.
So who are the people? Who are your key demographics now that are thinking, we want to be looking at electric vehicles? We've mentioned Tesla, and you look at their share price, they are clearly like far and away like the biggest player in this space, but pretty much every organisation that manufactures vehicles is trying to take a piece of that market. So who are the big players manufacturer side, and who are our key demographics customer side?
I'll start with the second one actually, if I may. So the key thing is, the first thing we noticed in the data, and we've analysed thousands or millions and millions of searches every month. And because if you go onto Auto Trader, the first thing that people do, they have to key in their postcode to see what cars are available. And once we have that piece of data, under all the necessary privacy laws, we're able to then profile that postcode. And what that tells us is that people that are most likely to consider electric cars are living in affluent postcodes. And that's been the case for that. Adoption is being driven by wealthier people. And that really is the first indicator. We're asked a lot actually, is there a correlation between public charging points and interest? Is there a correlation between low emission zones and interest? Or is there a north-south divide? Is it urban or rural? None of those things. Wealthy people who can afford an electric car are the ones that are most likely to add them into their basket. That's not to say that everybody is super rich, or Teslas and those sorts of things, because when you look at the brand splits, of course there are premium brands. They're always considered, whether it's petrol, diesel, electric or whatever. But we've seen a real emergence as more models have been introduced over the last couple of years. Notably, brands like Volkswagen in the last 6 months have launched 2 electric cars, and they've rocketed on the platform. MG, a big shout out to MG. They've done a brilliant job in marketing their cars. Huge levels of interest in those, as well as the more established EV players like Nissan and Renault. So, when we look, there are more and more cars coming onto the platform, which is giving people more and more choice, and it's starting to change slightly the demographic profile of people that are looking. But I wouldn't say there was one age group or one interest type. What we're seeing is your wealthier commuter towns or parts of cities. That's where there's more interest. For example, Manchester, within probably 2 miles of where we are now, there wouldn't be an awful lot of EV interest for a bunch of reasons. Charging might be a problem. If you go to the south of Manchester, into Cheshire, it's red hot. Loads of interest in places like Wilmslow, Macclesfield and Alderley Edge, and as you can imagine. Merseyside's another one. Formby, there's lots of interest. In central Liverpool, not a lot. So it's that pattern across the country. So if you were planning where to invest, where to try to sell electric cars, where to advertise electric cars, where to stock electric cars, that's what we share with our retailer our partners. Or if you were an electricity provider, you need to land infrastructure, or charging infrastructure, then that sort of data is helpful, we think.
Interesting, because I think do you think that's because people who are in those more affluent areas are more alive to the issue of electric vehicles, or do you think it is a matter of it's just a budgetary constraint that there are not yet the vehicles on the market hitting that real mass market price point?
I think there are a few reasons. So firstly, they're more likely to be able to afford it. Electric cars, let's face it, are at an advertised price level more expensive. And it's not until you really start to understand the monthly running costs of an electric car that you begin to realise that there are going to be savings, and there might be some parity in how much it costs you to have a car over 3 years. But essentially, if you see the price of 2 cars advertised side by side, one is electric, one is petrol, the electric car is much more expensive. That discounts a lot of people from the conversation. So that's kind of part number one. Part number two is they're cool. Electric cars are pretty cool, and they've got cooler. So there's a fashion thing definitely, I think, going on. The third thing I think is the part around charging and range, and these households are more likely to have off-street parking. They'll have 2 or 3 cars, off-street parking, the ability to charge at home. Finding a space to charge their car on a busy street is less of a problem for them. So there's a lot of the barriers that the current majority face, the mainstream, that these sort of households aren't faced with. So those are kind of some of the key things. But as more and more product comes into the market, and as the market matures and you get more used cars available, which is happening now, then the prospect of an EV is open to more people.
Fantastic. And, you know, if there's going to be any tweet of the day, electric vehicles are cool, is the one that we're going to be going with. You mentioned there around the second-hand market, and there is definitely a concern when people are talking about that, you know, if I buy an EV that's a couple of years old, is it good enough? The technology's moved on. And actually also that conversation is still playing out in, should I buy a new one now or should I wait another year's time? So what are the kind of issues going on there?
It's really, really very, very interesting, and it's constantly moving, actually. We're lucky enough, because of the nature of the data we have, to share it with lots of different bodies, and more recently, government policymakers in discussion around what we're seeing in the market. New electric vehicles, with the government grant applied or without, are affordable for many more people than they have been in the past. That's definitely a thing. So, you know, when you look at the savings available on fuel, for example, then new electric cars for a lot of people are starting to make a lot more sense, and that's great. There is a complexity around it, though, because those savings are really hard to work out for lots of people. There are kind of 4 things you've got to think about. You've got to think about the fuel. Okay, that's great, but I still have to charge that. What does electricity cost, and what does all that stuff mean? I don't really know. So there's a complexity there. The servicing costs, they are different for electric cars versus petrol and diesel, so there's something around that. Insurance is also a thing to consider. So there's a bunch of different considerations that people have got to figure out, and that's what we've been saying to the policymakers. That's got to be made more clear, and it's something that we've taken on ourselves on the website. How are we going to make that easier for consumers to sort of break through and understand? So that's kind of the part for electric. If you're buying a new electric car or a new petrol car, you need to be able to make that decision quite easily. Now, when it comes to used, it's really different. The older used cars that we're starting to see come back into the market now, they are starting to make more commercial sense. There are no issues with battery degradation or range that we know of, and we're in touch with a whole host of manufacturers, and certainly the ones that have been selling cars for 5 years or more. It's a question that we're asked quite frequently. Does the battery degrade? Will the range fall away? That sort of thing. That's not the case. They're not seeing that in their data. So, from what we can see, we're quite comfortable that isn't a problem. There might be a perception of it, and we've got to address that, but at the moment, not an issue at all. The key thing is in the values of younger used cars. What we're seeing there is, because of the incentives on the new, when those cars come back into the market after a year or two, they can sometimes be more expensive than that new car. So it's a difficult one. Why would you, as a consumer, buy a 1 or 2 year old electric car when the new one is that bit cheaper? So that's something that is definitely something that we've raised with whoever we can, just to say, look, this is a part of the market that needs support, because a healthy used car market will inevitably help a new car market and take us towards 2030.
Wonderful. And I think that's a great place for us to finish there. That role that Auto Trader has in translating that consumer data through to government policy will really help to drive change and see more adoption of those vehicles. So thank you ever so much for joining us, Mark. We're now moving on to a case study from a very different business. We're going to hear from Julie Newell at Booths talking around the charging infrastructure in their real estate.
Things that we've spoken about a few times over the course of the day is the role that chargers and the charging infrastructure have in the increase in use in EVs. And I'm thrilled that today we're joined by Julie at Booths, who's going to talk a little bit around the work that Booths has been doing across their real estate to help people to be able to easily charge their EVs and explain some of the impact that that's had on their regions. So if I could just ask you to introduce yourself properly, Julie, and let us know a little bit about your role at Booths.
Certainly. Hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Ilona. So my name's Julie Newell. I'm property manager for Booths Supermarkets. We're predominantly in the north of England, Cumbria, Yorkshire, Cheshire, Lancashire, all along the south coast. We have 28 stores, and as part of my kind of remit, I also manage a let property portfolio too. So we've been around for knocking on 180 years now. We're a long established business. And we have a really strong ethos around fitting our business in around a community and forming a strong bond within that community, which I think we've been kind of mightily successful at. So yeah, that's the introduction about myself.
Fantastic. And you've touched on it there, Booths is this real kind of heritage brand, very, very involved in communities. And I'm presuming the answer to my next question, which is kind of what prompted you to look at EVs, is driven by having those kind of intrinsic values in the company.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've been working on and we've been very much focused on our carbon footprint over a number of years now. And I like to think, in terms of some kind of elements, we're ahead of the game a little bit, because we feel it is our duty within these communities, to take a bit of a lead by example. And it's of huge kind of interest to us anyway. There's a lot of interest within the business in energy saving initiatives, that kind of thing. There's a lot of investment kind of going on within the business now. And just so a couple of years ago, it became apparent to us that some of our far-reaching stores, perhaps in kind of Cumbria and Ripon, for example, in Yorkshire, that the EV network was struggling a little bit. There were huge kind of voids at that time. I believe there's been kind of inroads, excuse the pun, since to remedy that. And so we decided to start having a look at partnering with a third party with view to providing EV chargers for our customers, because we were also aware that many of our customers were on the cusp of thinking about purchasing an electric vehicle, but kind of given the range of the technology in the vehicles that was on offer. At the time, again, this technology has come on since. There wasn't a lot of confidence that they could travel very far, and because our stores were in between, say, if you went up to Cumbria and you were on your way further north, to Scotland, there was a big kind of void there. So we thought, this could actually spur customers and other people on. It could drive footfall, of course, and could spur other people on to make that change and kind of look at purchasing an EV vehicle, which we know is the future. So that's very much
amazing. And what an incredible decision to take as a supermarket, that not only is this a response to consumer demand, but actually feeling that real responsibility that you have to do the right thing by the environment, but actually then looking at the data and the locations to kind of say, actually by positioning things here, we can have an enormous impact on the entire region, not just kind of on our immediate customer footfall. I think that's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, our focus is always, we do focus on the communities, but, you've got to look at the broader picture to see the, kind of local gains, if that makes sense.
It does, absolutely. And I think it is that community, isn't it? It's fitting all of those different bits in.
We all have an obligation here, I believe, and that's what us as a business firmly believe to be the case.
Wonderful. And you mentioned when you started looking around the possibility of bringing EV chargers in, the choice to work with a third party. So the EV charging network is a relatively new kind of business model. If people have real estate, whether that's car parks or kind of other areas, and they're looking at doing this, what's the kind of business model that sits behind that?
I think, for us, when we started to look into this, this kind of needed to fit in with our business kind of model in terms of, we offer a limited amount of free parking on all of our sites, and we needed to, ensure that whoever we partnered with offered us a degree of flexibility. They have the right product, the right kind of ethics around their business as well that kind of match with ours, and that it kind of tied in with what we were trying to achieve in our customer offer. And actually what we have achieved is the company that we partnered with supply us with rapid chargers. So essentially this means for a standard EV vehicle, it takes about 20-25 minutes for a full charge, which kind of ties in with the amount of time we would expect them to spend in our store. They might do a bit of shopping, might have a coffee. Now, this technology is changing all of the time. The chargers are getting faster and faster. And again, that will tie in with our business kind of model with the cafe and the food to go. And so it's a very good partnership. It's a good relationship that we've got, and we can see longevity in it.
Fantastic. And I love there again, it's bringing the customer right back to the centre of the journey every time. So it's what works for them for charging, what works for them in the way that they utilise our stores, and that presumably has meant that you've had quite a positive response from customers. What's the demand and reaction been like?
Yeah, I mean, I receive quarterly performance reports, which are hugely interesting. I mean, we always knew that it was going to be very varied depending on which kind of area. There were going to different kind of levels of uptake, and that certainly has been the case. What surprised us, I think up to pre-COVID, I think we had a full year of performance kind of data to look at, and at some stores we were seeing 40+% uptake in kind of usage, and these were at in areas where we fully expected, where if you will, that these voids were in EV charging availability. So yeah, it's been interesting. COVID, of course, has skewed all of the performance kind of data, because I'm still trying to make sense of it now, but we're hoping it's going to settle down again in some respects. We're hoping it's the whole trauma that we've been through over the last kind of 12 months have probably will have encouraged people to take a bit more of a look at sustainable ways, to kind of travel, and this may have a direct impact.
Absolutely. I think it's
one of those fallout things from kind of COVID that we believe, kind of may occur. We're just living in.
It's too early to say, isn't it? When you look at that data, the last 12 months is absolutely not a benchmark, but great to see that demand's still there. Do you think, and I appreciate, again, it's hard to tell because of the last 12 to 18 months that you've had, do you think that has encouraged more people in the areas where your stores are to make that decision to switch to an electric vehicle?
Yeah, definitely. And they're telling us that too. We can see it in the usage data, and yes, we're receiving feedback too. It's kind of it's that whole EV community was a real surprise to me, because it is just that. It's a real community that exists with its own etiquettes, and it's for example, it's not the done thing to park in an EV, even though we don't enforce it, it's not etiquette, if you like, to park in an EV parking spot if you don't have an EV vehicle, or you move it very quickly. So there's a real nice kind of community etiquette thing kind of going on around it. Yeah, it's I diverse.
No, it's fine. I like that that's kind of come full circle back into when you very first started talking about booths, you spoke about community and being active in those communities. So the fact that by doing this, you kind of discovered a new community is actually just a really nice way of tying those things together. So obviously it's been phenomenally successful. It's keeping your customers happy. It's making a difference to people taking on EVs. So what's next? What are the next steps for booths in this area?
Well, I think for us, it's very much we're keeping an eye on the data and understanding what the demand is. You know, certainly we provide between 2 and 4 EV charging units at 15 of our stores. You know, throughout the north, and it's just keeping an eye on that kind of data. But you know, we have kind of built in. We try to future-proof to a degree. You know, extending the kind of service, and it's a really strange one because. At the beginning of it, you know, I mean, we really did take a leap of faith, especially at the stores where, you know, our partner was telling us there were likely to be a big kind of uptake in, you know, using these kind of chargers. So it was a bit of a leap of faith for us to hand over 4 valuable spaces in prime locations within our kind of car parks. But, you know, no regrets. It's going very well. It's better than anticipated, and you know, I think it was very brave of us, and it was really nice to be on the front foot, you know, of this kind of technology.
It is, and I think what you've really highlighted there is how important it is for businesses to take that leap of faith, to know that what you're doing aligns with your company values. It's keeping the customer at the centre of that and trusting that that will be the right thing and it'll pay off. So thank you so much for joining us today. We are all obviously hoping to be back out and about a lot more than we were, and I'm sure we will all be coming in to visit your stores in all of these wonderful locations soon.
Please do. There's lots of nice things on offer, especially as we're coming into summer.
We'll be there, have a coffee, charge our car. You won't be able to get rid of us. Thank you ever so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
A fantastic interview there with Julie, and really about putting the customer at the centre of that journey. And keeping the customer in mind, I'm delighted next to introduce a video from Adrian Del Maestro at PwC talking about what is needed for EV adoption.
Delighted to be joined by Adrian from PwC, and I'm going to let him introduce himself and his role in a moment. Obviously, we are not going to have to introduce PwC. They're a very well-known brand, and it's been really interesting for me as we've had conversations with them recently to understand their role and involvement both as an organisation that employs a lot of people and with having that really strong market position, to get an insight into EVs and particularly around the charging infrastructure. So before we get cracking on the content, could you let us know a little bit more about your role, Adrian?
Ilona, thank you very much, and thank you to your organisation for letting us speak at this event. So, as you say, my name is Adrian Del Maestro. I'm a director in our strategy consulting business at PwC Strategy, and we do a lot of work in sustainability. And PwC has a net zero commitment. We've always been focused on sustainability. And unsurprisingly, a lot of the work that we do now is with our clients, helping them navigate the net zero journey and helping them decarbonize their operations.
Wonderful, thank you. And it's great to see that commitment, not just from kind of big players like PwC, but it actually being part of the conversation in so many different businesses. And I know that work and research that you do there will be hugely valuable. So if we could just turn to focus on the importance of the charging infrastructure. We've mentioned it a couple of times over the course of this event, but can you give us an idea of just how important it is and the impact that that has on the take-up of EVs?
A very good question, a very simple question. Charging infrastructure is going to be critical if we're going to successfully adopt electric vehicles in the UK. It's always helpful just to take maybe a step back and have a look at the macro picture. So if you look at what our government's doing, they have a very strong green agenda, and they've announced recently that they're going to ban all sales of petrol, diesel vehicles, ICE ban brought forward to 2030, and that's part of a broader green agenda that the government's pushing. And needless to say, this is not just in the UK, this is a build back better momentum that we see across Europe. So that's a positive story. In terms of electric vehicles in the UK, we have about 500,000 vehicles in the UK. It's starting from a very small base, but it's growing quickly. So it's about 75% year-on-year growth on electric vehicles, which is a good story. And it's also worth noting as well that despite the impact of COVID-19 last year in 2020, registrations for electric vehicles in the UK doubled to around about 170,000 vehicles. So that's a positive story. In terms of charging infrastructure, we have over 20,000 publicly available fast and slow chargers in the UK, which sounds like a lot, but we need more, and we need them in the right location. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is people who are thinking about adopting electric vehicles, whether it's consumers like you and myself or corporates, there are still two blockers, which is one is around range anxiety and one is around access to charging infrastructure. So on the range anxiety, and I like to describe it sometimes as perceived range anxiety, people are still worried that getting from A to B, they're going to run out of juice at some point. And even though the mileage of electric vehicles has improved significantly, that's still a concern. And related to that is your ability to actually get access to charging infrastructure. So the easiest way to charge is at home. The problem is if you live in areas like in cities, it's quite difficult to have off-street car parking and therefore charging at home. And therefore you have to rely on on-street charging. And sometimes they're not available or they're not in the right location. And we really do need to fix that problem if we're going to encourage massive EV adoption.
Thank you. That's really useful. And yeah, that perceived range anxiety is we've spoken about a couple of times, and sometimes it is just making these charging points more visible so that we have that sense of confidence before individuals go to make that purchase. And one of the things you touched on then was, as an individual consumer, the most likely places that will charge at home, and we've got quite a different way of using our own vehicles compared to a commercial fleet. So what are the kind of issues that you work on with businesses where they're looking not just at their own individual EVs, but they're looking at transferring commercial vehicles over to an electric version?
Yeah, so Ilona, yet again, you touch on a very big topic. So fleet electrification is a massive topic. So first of all, let's start with the basics. When we say fleet, there's different types of fleets. So think of corporate car fleets, logistics vans, taxis, buses. So there's all these different types of fleets. There's a lot of them. In the UK, there are over 5 million members of the fleet. And that means if you were to electrify a large chunk of that fleet, you'd make a big step forward in electric vehicle adoption in the UK. So fleets are definitely a big opportunity. And it's becoming bigger because what you're seeing are businesses and corporates announcing net zero ambitions. And when they start making those ambitions, they then start looking at their operations and they're trying to work out how they can decarbonize their operations. And lo and behold, they quickly focus on their fleet. So that's where the opportunity is. And there is lots of upside to decarbonizing your fleet. There's clearly the enhancement to your sustainability reputation. There are significant fuel savings that can be made by converting your fleet. And needless to say, if you have more electric vehicles of fleet on the road, that's going to be a driver of charging infrastructure, because that charging infrastructure needs to be accelerated to meet that demand. So great story, great potential. Unfortunately, there is a but. It's not a straightforward journey. It's quite a complex transformation. So if you think about it, when fleet managers are thinking about how to convert their fleet, they're going to have to deal with a number of issues. Some of them, just to give you a flavor, how do you procure these vehicles? Yeah, will you be able to get the vehicles, the electric vehicles you need from the OEMs? How are you going to fund those acquisitions? how are you going to charge those vehicles? Because if you've got a depot-based model, you charge at the depot, or you charge at home. Well, if you charge at the depot, you're going to have to figure out, what's the best location, what are the grid connection costs going to be? They can be quite significant sometimes. When are the best times to charge at the depot? You want to take advantage of lower tariffs. If you're going to charge at home, so if you've got fleet employees going at home, we come back to that issue that I've just alluded to, which is they may not be able to charge at home, and therefore how are they going to charge on street? So you've got complexity around the charging model, complexity around how you procure these vehicles, and even to the point of getting your business aligned to decarbonize. If you think of the different stakeholders within a business, you'll have the fleet manager, you'll have the HR person, you'll have the person responsible for energy procurement, the person responsible for real estate. They all need to be aligned, and the business case needs to be developed there. So it's not a straightforward journey. It certainly can be done. And also, just to add one other layer of complexity, when we talk about fleet electrification, it's easier to electrify the lighter vehicles. If you're talking about heavy goods vehicles, you're going to need other technologies like biomethane and potentially hydrogen. So the direction of travel is very clear towards sustainable fleets, but it's a complex journey.
Incredible. You did such a good job of summarising several different layers of complexity and multiple stakeholders. But it's so encouraging to hear that that is the direction of travel, no pun intended, towards electric vehicles and other options. I know that PwC has done quite a lot of work around this, and we will signpost to that on the microsite. And of course, Electricity North West is also there to support, and we will signpost towards the support there as well. So thank you ever so much for joining us, Adrian. I'm sure people will have lots of questions for you after this event, and hopefully we'll see that trend continue.
That video from Adrian marks the last formal planned part of the agenda. But we did ask you to send us all of your questions, and you more than delivered. The chat has been going wild all event, which has been absolutely amazing to see. And what's been particularly lovely is to see that community start to build up already of you starting to answer each other's questions. There is no way in the next kind of 5 minutes or so that we're going to be able to answer all of those questions, but we do still have access to the chat. We'll be bobbing back directly to specific questions where we can. Do keep those questions coming directly to Electricity North West, or use the AEV Explained Twitter handle and let us know on social media if there's other things you want to cover. We're absolutely intending that this will be the series of engagement events, so if we've not covered certain topics today, shout up and let us know. But we are now going to go into our very final section. Something of a little EV quiz here for Mike Taylor and Keith Evans, both of Electricity North West. So we picked out a few questions from the chat where these themes were recurring to make sure that we make the most of this section. So the first question that I'm going to pose to both of you is, what does the EV revolution mean for local garages? We've got this whole economy built up around fixing and maintaining petrol and diesel vehicles. What is that going to look like in the EV world?
So cars are still going to need servicing. They're still going to need their MOTs doing. There's still moving parts on electric vehicles. There's a lot less moving parts on a full battery electric vehicle, but it still needs the tyres, brakes, bodywork, servicing, and the main point is that garages will need retraining, how to work safely with the cars, and how to work with the electric motors. And there are approved government approvals to electric vehicle garages.
Anything to add on that, Mike?
Yeah, I think we'll see garages diversify a little bit as well. So your local sort of family-run garage business will possibly offer coffee as well while they're there charging the vehicle, or whether having some work done in the vehicle. I think you'll see that there'll be a whole new sort of revenue stream sort of come out of these vehicle charging, sort of how they do this, how they recycled batteries and all that kind of stuff. I think there'll be another sort of revenue stream for them to sort of pick up on.
Fantastic. So a real opportunity there to keep doing the work that they are doing around maintenance, but also potential other revenue streams. And I think it's also worth mentioning that when we talk about this 2030 date, that's new vehicles. We're not suddenly not going to have all those cars on the road. It isn't something that's going to happen overnight. And unintentional segue here, while we're talking about overnight, I'm going to talk around peak and off-peak charging times. If we start encouraging everybody to charge their cars at off-peak times and that market keeps increasing and increasing, are our peak times going to become off-peak and vice versa? Will there become a time where there isn't that cheap time to charge?
Yeah, I think we will see that. We'll see that transition of the energy will be used much more in the system at certain times. Like at the moment, you know, we see off-peak because the energy system is not being used at that point. But we will see that transition to this zero carbon where people will be charging vehicles at night, heating homes at night, doing washing at night, because that will be the cheaper rate. So, you know, smart metering will allow us to make our network much more flexible on certain hours of the day of what we charge as and when as such from a supplier point of view. And I think it will allow us to sort of use the network much more in a instead of a sort of a demand-driven way that we use it as and when we've got certain problems on the sort of the network as well. So when we're having frequency problems and such, we'll incentivise certain parts of the network that we need certain options to happen as such from providers who are offering services. So I think it will make the network much more flexible and more opportunities to play different tunes on our network than we do now.
Fantastic. And I suppose it's not really normal, is it, that we have this up and down? Like, if we could have a steady usage, that's kind of the ideal from an infrastructure point of view. Anything to add on that, Keith, around the kind of off-peak charging systems?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're trying to incorporate into the energy system now is more flexible services. And that's actually something that EVs are really good for utilising, especially where we've got demand response through smart charging, but also the potential of vehicle to grid in the future, actually being able to generate back into the network. And we're really keen to work with aggregators and large fleet owners to actually incentivise that flexible services arrangement. And actually, it's a good revenue stream for them to actually pay back a little bit of the cost of the additional costs of the vehicles.
Fantastic. And that brings us on really lovely, actually, to our final question, talking around those vehicle-to-grid charging points. Will that affect network fault levels? Will it affect voltage levels? And how, as Electricity North West, will you be able to control that?
Yeah, it will, as we're moving from a centralised energy system to a more decentralised energy system, and energy coming onto the system at a number of places, it affects fault current, you know, and we're seeing that now. Our system up until this date has been a pretty dumb system, really. We just manage, you know, we look at and we manage sort of volts and amps, but now the systems that we're overlaying on the energy network are much more sort of allowing us to see what the network is doing really down at granular level to sort of how we sort of ask for certain services, flexible services to manage frequency, to manage fault current, to manage load. All these options are different things that we're doing with the network now that we've never been able to do before. It's great. It's, you know, we've seen more developments on the network in the last, you know, 3 to 5 years than we have done in the last 30, you know, I've been in the industry 30 years, and it's amazing what we're looking to implement on the network. We're investing, you know, upwards of £50 million on network technology to sort of make this network much more flexible and we can do something with, you know.
Incredible. So a real opportunity there, and genuinely backed by, you know, the political will, the investments that are going on there, to know that as we're making these changes, we're not going to be in this position where one thing happens and your light goes off, which is sometimes the fear. Anything to add on that vehicle to grid charging, Keith?
So in terms of your question about fault level, the actual fault level of the vehicles in terms of their input is actually very similar to solar panels. So the easiest way to think about these charges is actually it's the equivalent of having a set of solar panels on your house in terms of the fault-in feeds. They're all inverter fed, and the protection that sits in the back of them does mean that they will go off if there is a fault on the network. So there shouldn't be too many additional issues relating to the fault level.
Fantastic. So whilst that looks very different in that it's a car and it's doing something, the actual bits that are going on behind the scenes are things that we've become used to dealing with. I'm sure that is very reassuring. So that's the end of the questions from the chat. The final question that I want to kind of put to both of you today, and it's something that we've mentioned a couple of times today, for the businesses that are watching, and thank you to all of you for watching. It has been way over the number of businesses that we hoped would sign up, and it's been brilliant to see those high levels of engagement all day. If people are now thinking, I'm going to do something differently, I'm going to buy an EV, I'm going to electrify my fleet, how can Electricity North West help? What do they need to do to get in touch with you?
Go to our website. There's lots of information on our website on vehicle charging. And contact us, you know, sort of we'll send our email addresses out. If people want to ring me or contact me by email, I'm happy to help with sort of any questions that they've got on vehicle charging for them or for their business, where they are in our local area. Yeah, just go on our website and have a look, or drop me an email.
Wonderful. And just again to reiterate, on the microsite that you've been watching this on, we do have the link directly through to that Net Zero Hub for Electricity North West, so absolutely the best first port of call for you there. So finally, I would like to thank all of you again for watching. An absolutely massive thank you to all of our speakers today. I know I've learned absolutely loads. It is a topic that is not going anywhere, so expect to see a lot more activity in this space. Hopefully we've managed to answer most of your questions, but do keep coming up those questions and we will do our best to stay in touch. Thanks ever so much.